Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock p.m. and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, September the 5th. I'd like to welcome all of our staff and guests in attendance today, either in person or virtually, as well as those who will view these proceedings at a later date. I'm Councillor Richard Novak, and I'm joined today by my colleagues from my far left, Mayor McNeil Smith, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul, and from my far right, Councillor Duck, Councillor Duncan, and Councillor Garnett. I would like to acknowledge that we're privileged to live, work, and play on the ancestral and unceded territory of the WSÁNEĆ nations, whose stewardship of these lands and waters from time immemorial have allowed us to flourish here today. I'd like to start with the approval of the agenda, and I would like to add that the agenda be approved with the addition to item 7A of the email from S. Clausa. Can I get that motion from somebody? Mayor Smith? Yeah. Second?
Just a question, Mayor, did you have an additional item for the agenda, the motion you circulated? Okay. I second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Passed. Thank you. Now we come to the public participation period. This section of the agenda allows members of the public to speak to any of the items on the agenda. Today, public participation is limited to those agenda items which do not have dedicated presentation components. And there is only one agenda item which fits this criteria, and that is item number 9. Speakers are asked to limit their comments to 4 minutes. I'll ask for the first time if there is anyone who wishes to speak to committee. Thank you. Please state your name and your place of residence.
Don't ask me for my social security.
John,
No.
just turn on the microphone.
Oh yes, and red button, or button to turn the mic red, yes.
John Trelevin, I live on 3rd Street in Sydney. I rise today just to say a few words about some thoughts on transportation in this region. I regret that I can't stay for the Mayor's presentation later in the meeting on the document that is before you. It is ironic that we are meeting to start, this presentation will be given today, the Mayor's discussion later, on the day in which Sydney Elementary School is completely surrounded by semis, cement trucks, and cars on the first day of school, on the first day of that elementary school, during the construction of the Keating flyover. You didn't see Check News tonight. There are terrified parents because they know that that road will be full of heavy industrial traffic as well as cars and whatnot over perhaps the next 3 or 4 years. In my view, in recent history, the Keating flyover project is one of the greatest failures of the regional district in terms of having a regional transportation policy, well-funded, that works on behalf of the whole community. I'm going to tell you a story. A few years after we arrived in Sydney, the province asked the 4 municipalities on the Saanich Peninsula to participate in a study on the upgrades to the Pat Bay Highway. Saanich, of course, being Saanich, immediately dropped out because why would they spend time with the 3 peninsula municipalities? So we were 3. I was asked, and I was honored to be asked to be a citizen participant on behalf of the town of Sydney. 3 mayors, 3 CAOs. The, I think, 2-year process was chaired by the CAO of Central Saanich, and you did a brilliant job. The first meeting, Dave Elder, who was the district engineer based in Nanaimo, was the Highways Department representative. And the first thing Dave Elder said was, you've got to understand there's no money. But go ahead, give us your views. Which we did. It was a very good report, a great process. Everybody agreed at that table, no question. Safety was the issue. And I think the province of British Columbia felt that these three municipalities couldn't agree on the time of day, let alone how to invest in the Pat Bay Highway. But we all did. Two recommendations: a pedestrian overpass at Beacon and the Keating flyover. Dave Elder, I was there when he was told by the mayor of Sydney at the time that school children crossed the peninsula, the Pat Bay Highway every day during the academic year. That unemotional engineer went white as a ghost. This is the Highways Department of British Columbia who built that highway, who seemingly had no idea that there was not a structure allowed to save the lives of school children. We did agree. We made the presentation to the Highways Department. Oh, I'll mention one other thing. First Nations were part of this consultation. And at one point, somebody said, "Oh yes, well there is a pedestrian overpass down there by the Schwartz Bay Ferry." And I think the district engineer opined that it was built after a First Nations child was killed. He was on a bike, came down the hill, couldn't stop, went into the Pat Bay Highway and was killed. You could have heard a pin drop when the First Nations leader said, no, that's wrong. It wasn't built until after the second child was killed. There have been untold numbers of consultations and consultants' reports written about the need for an independent, well-funded transportation commission for a city of 420,000 people. The most recent one, you'll know, Mr. Mayor, I think was published in about 2018. Very, very good report. The number one recommendation, though, was establish a well-funded, independent transportation commission. And if you're not prepared to do that, don't worry about all these other recommendations because they will not happen. So here we are. There is no pedestrian overpass at Beacon. Half of the Keating flyover is being built. Where's the other half? Oh, well, you know, the province bought us off. Now, all credit to Ryan Windsor and that council. They at least achieved half, and it's going to be a tough job constructing, but it's being done. I have seen the presentation to the board of the CRD from the Transportation Committee on this issue. And in that presentation, I was only really angry about two things. One was, this is a 3-year study that will lead to the possibility of deciding what to advocate about in 3 years. Secondly, the word business does not appear anywhere in that presentation. 12 years ago, I organized the first tour of industry for the Sandwich Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. 9 businesses, spontaneous and unrehearsed. The number one concern they had was housing. What was number 2? Public transportation. This process, frankly, is an abomination. A 3-year study to determine what you want to advocate for, you know better than anybody, Mr. Councillor, that the transit authorities do not respond to this community in any way. We are very well aware of grumpy taxpayers that TransLink, the 22 mayors agreed to form TransLink after the province of British Columbia offered them $330 million free and clear the health tax on their regional tax. Magically, 22 mayors agreed to create what was necessary. That is not an offer that's ever been made to the region, And the study that's proposed, it'll be interesting, there'll be very interesting data. But the study that's proposed, if you look at that presentation, funding is the third or fourth different priority. From my experience, and the town of Sydney's experience, and Central Saanich and North Saanich experience, working on a highways, provincially mandated study on that highway, nothing will happen until you sort out the funding. Guess what? The Pat Bay Highway. Now this is absolutely truthful. No word of a lie. She made a very interesting presentation about the future of the highway and all that.
John, excuse me, we're running out of time. I'll give you one more minute.
I went to her and I said, have you looked at the study that 6 months ago we delivered, the Peninsula municipal governments delivered to you about the Pat Bay Highway? No, she said, I've never seen it. I am sorry. Mr. Mayor, as a director of the CRD, and I don't have a vote in the CRD, as a director of the CRD, please, I know who I'm talking to, Cliff, okay, but please try and achieve something from the CRD that actually tackles the problem that this whole region faces. And it is a fragmented transportation policy. We all pay a hell of a price. I don't know how you get to the province because neither major political party wants this region to function. I'm sorry I can't stay for your presentation, but I'll watch it tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'll call for a second time if there is anybody wishing to speak in the public participation period. Thank you. Please give your name and your place of residence.
I can, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to get up to speak. My name is...
Can you press the button, please?
Is it supposed to be red or, oh, there it is, supposed to be red. My name is Sheila Fay, and I live at number 23-10457 Resthaven Drive. I was going to get up to speak about White Birch Road, which I will in a second, but I was quite shocked about John Trevelyan coming up and speaking about what's happening at Keating Crossroads School. And the reason I was totally interested in it, because I am a grandmother of two precious grandchildren that go to that school. And what happened last year, the wisdom of Central Saanich Council, is that they decided to narrow the road going by the school because they wanted to put another crosswalk in on the other side of the school. So now this road is twice as narrow, or not twice, but at least a third narrow than what it was. So when the trucks are going there now, because I get the chance to drop off my grandchildren or pick them up on a regular basis, these big trucks go there and their rear view mirrors almost hit every time they're going down this road. It is a disaster just waiting to happen. So that will be a bone of contention, I think, for the whole district, the way they're doing that Keating Crossroad overpass. What I wanted to explain about myself today is about White Birch Road. And
Excuse me, there will be a public participation.
do you want me to
period
speak then on that, at that one, at
Yes,
that
please.
time?
Yes,
I
please.
didn't understand that from that thing. I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll call again if there is anybody wishing to present at the public participation period at this time. And we'll call one more third and final time if there's anybody wishing to present to committee. No one? Great, thank you. I'll now declare that this section of public participation is at a close. Thank you to all who contributed. Now we're at item 5, approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of August 14th?
I'll move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Any corrections, additions, changes? Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Carried. Item 6, presentations. There aren't any. Item 7, development applications. 7A, We'll start with zoning amendment application number RZ100107 and development permit number DP100841. Before we go to presentations, I would just like to ask staff if there's anything they'd like to bring forward. Ms. Verhagen.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. One additional note on this application. So currently the proposal is for a zoning amendment and a development permit for a new development on this property. We've recently been notified by the applicant that they would also like to apply for a development variance permit to reduce the minimum setback of parking on the east side of the site. We are just in the process of working through this with them, so they may speak to it in their presentation. The bylaw, the off-street parking and loading bylaw requires a 1 meter setback for all parking, surface parking from property lines. The drawing set in the package attached to the staff report shows parking directly adjacent to that property line, which also has a retaining wall currently at it. There's a change in grade here between this property and the property to the east. We received a revised plan today showing a 0.6 meter setback. So we are working with the applicant on what exactly the variance application would be for, but that could be added to the application here. And if that is the case, then staff would be recommending a slight change to the staff recommendation in the report. Currently in the agenda here and in the staff report, there is one condition listed. We would be recommending that a second condition be listed to be addressed before the application proceeds to the Advisory Planning Commission. The first one says that the applicant submit a traffic impact assessment prepared by a qualified professional. Staff would recommend adding a number 2, that that prior to review by the Advisory Planning Commission, the applicant submit a development variance permit application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Okay, so we'll now move to a presentation from the applicant. I think it's Brian Pearson, the architect, and Brent Alston, the owner. Are you both online?
Yes, I'm here.
And
I believe Brent is online, but I was to speak first.
I'm also here.
all right, go ahead.
Okay, well, it's good to be here with you again. My name is Brian Pearson. I'm the lead architect on this project, and I've been working with the team of architects and engineers and technicians to bring this back before you again. Subsequent to the last public hearing, the development team challenged the design team on how we might, while maintaining the character of the design, streamline the ask with respect to variances, reducing the unit count, and in turn responding to some of the public criticisms that arose in the hearings. So I've generated some diagrams just that might help everyone sort of understand the context of the project. And, you know, as I say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So if I can share my screen, then maybe we can take a look at some diagrams, and they might help inform some of the dialogue.
Brian, we're getting a little bit of feedback. Do you have a second device operating there?
Please bear with me.
Brian, I think that might have been my speaker there. I'll mute myself. That may help.
Let's try that, because I'm failing at getting my headphones to work. So let's see if I can share my screen with you all. So I've put together a few images here. In this first image, we're starting with just where the properties are. And this is a really unique property, as you can see, because the property of 2060, which is our property, plus the marina, has a very interesting condition where it shares a roadway with 2056 White Birch. So you can see that sliver of roadway that works its way up to the waterfront area. And this is something that's obviously impacting this design and some of the decisions that we're making and some of the feedback that we're getting. So here I've highlighted our site in green, and you can see that we, in the context of that, have an existing CD37 zoning setback boundary that was from a previous development agreement for this site. So in the previous iteration of the design, we were pushing on the edges of this boundary a little bit to some degree, and then we were getting some pushback on that. So as I mentioned, the development team has asked us to take another look at the design and reduce the asks that we're asking of you with respect to variances. So what we've tried to do is to stay within this boundary and not push outside of it. So here is sort of a roof plan. You can see our building, you can see the existing marina facilities building, you can see the adjacent buildings. And what we did is we removed some material from the volume on the north side of the building. So in essence, we've removed a number of units, and that's allowed us to shift or push the building away from the north property line. And this is actually given us a number of opportunities that I'll mention. But in addition to that, we were able to shift the entire building to the east, away from the roadway a little bit, which again provided a few advantages, which I'll outline in a second. In this diagram, and this is the diagram that we've included in our package as well, not exactly the same, but what we've shown here are some of the proximities between the various buildings in the greater context here. So now, with a little bit of further study, you could look at this and you could see what we're trying to demonstrate is that the placement of this building, how it's been sited, is contextual with its surrounding context. The distances between the buildings is relatively similar or proportionate. So you'll see this as well when we get to the shadow study. You'll see that the shadows are generally the same by all the buildings because they're all relatively the same size and spaced evenly apart. So I think we jump a few slides. Now here, what this has done, the shift has done, what the shift has given us is an opportunity to increase the landscape buffering. Now there is substantial landscape buffering that exists along certain property lines, but by shifting the building away from the north property line and a little bit to the east, it allowed for increased landscape buffering, which I think is advantageous from everyone's perspective. Another advantage is in the removal of the CRU, which was previously a contentious issue. There was an opportunity to relocate the principal lobby onto White Birch Road, which in working with your public service was a desired result, something that is even spoken to in the multi-family design guidelines. So I think this was another positive result of the manipulation of the building. Now, I wanted to show you this shadow study briefly here. This is something that we did proactively. We were asked to do this previously, and we provided a format that we often do that works its way through, the solstices and the equinoxes. It was there wasn't any criteria that was provided for us, so it was a challenging as the designer to respond to the results of the study itself. So in this case, we've proactively shown this is March 21st. This is the entire day. Each it's layered every hour, so the darker areas are where you're going to receive the most shadow. The lighter areas where you're not. And we're hoping that sort of proactively engage with your team to develop what is a reasonable expectation with regards to shadow. But we wanted to show you the greater context in this instance, just to show you sort of the placing, the siting of the building, and we're sort of just understanding this building as being somewhat equal with respect to its neighboring properties. So, and the final image I wanted to show you, this is something we did. We did a little bit of a rendering just of the site, the massing itself. We wanted to show you that, as designers, we're always thinking about the implications or mitigation of shadowing on adjacent properties. So, we cut that building back initially on the north side, and now it's been pulled even further away. And as you can see, there's a great deal of landscape buffering now that we've introduced along that edge. So I think, like, overall, it's been challenging, but we've been able to maintain the character of the design, and we've been able to respond to a great number of comments that have come up. And ultimately, I think it's a more successful submission or project. I hope you think so too. And I'll hand over the microphone to Brent.
Thanks, Brian. So I'll quickly touch on some of a quick summary of all the modifications we've made from our last concept, and then I'll also talk about some points of contention during our last public hearing and try to address those. So I'll quickly share my screen here. So briefly, just the main summaries of modifications. Brian's touched on this, but we reduced our density unit counts. We're down to 0.9 FAR and 60 apartments. Our site coverage has been reduced down to 29%. We've increased landscaped areas. We've increased our setbacks from neighboring properties. We've reduced our height and shading effects. And we've improved privacy, reduced noise from the removal of the rooftop amenity space. And we've improved our ingress and egress by increasing the private roadway width. So just on density, setbacks, and site coverage, Richard's report did a really good job speaking to this. I won't spend too much time on this, but yeah, as I said that Brian kind of mentioned, we're surrounded by RM5 density. 2 of the buildings are 4 stories in height. So we're asking to be treated with as a similar lens as how all our neighbors are being treated. This gives you a zoning comparison diagram, just outlining how our project compares to the RM5 zoning and another approved project in Sydney was Oslo and Fifth, which is also in a medium density neighborhood. You can see it modeled here below. So our floor area ratio is 0.95, Oslo and Fifth was 1.56. Our site coverage is 35%, Oslo was 62, RM5, you're allowed 55%. All of our setbacks are greatly exceeding the minimum requirements. So we feel like our ask here for our density and our setbacks and site coverage, we feel it's all very reasonable. Brian kind of mentioned the reduced height and shading effects. So we've sucked the building away from argosy. I want to touch on that. There's natural shading that occurs from 2020 and 2050 white birches. You can see they have lots of trees here that cause shading. And then in the argosy building, I'll just note that all their units, actually all their living areas and kitchen face the water. The backside of the building has common area hallways and bedrooms, so if there is any shading, it should be very not much of a concern to them. ingress and egress. This was brought up by members of council as a big issue in the last public hearing. The mayor did a good job and kind of broke down why he kind of thought this wasn't such an issue, but I just want to point out that, you know, our road width was 20 feet. We're actually widening it to 22. The town of Sydney's bylaw requires that the minimum access aisles have a minimum width of 18 feet. So we'll be exceeding that by 4 feet. This has been reviewed by your civil department and will meet all criteria and circulation for emergency vehicles, including fire trucks. So we really feel that this shouldn't really be much of an issue. And the road's extremely wide, and it meets all your city's requirements. Another couple examples in the neighborhood is Resthaven by the Sea has a private road. This serves 68 condos and 39 townhouses. It's 20 feet wide, and it's actually more complex. Like, it has, you know, worse sight lines, and it serves more density. Seawind Way and Sandpiper Lane. These are just down the street, and these accommodate two-way traffic, and they're much more narrow. They're only 15 feet wide and actually bottleneck to as little as 11 feet wide. Traffic seems to be brought up as a major concern. I know you've recommended we do a traffic study. I mean, we feel it should be necessary, but I just want to highlight some data on this. This was some data provided by your city, your traffic departments. It was collected in April 2022. The average daily traffic is 360 vehicles. The average speed is only 27 kilometers per hour. I asked your city engineer technician to provide some comparable data for other roads that are similar with, you know, no stoplights, one row of street parking. Harbor Road, he thought was quite a good similar comparison, has very similar conditions, and it accommodates 1,623 vehicles per day compared to our 361 on White Birch. And this gives you a street view of what that road looks like. Another one he's provided was James White Boulevard, which is just past Thrifties. That bottlenecks to 7.3 meters wide, and it serves 643 vehicles per day. So, you know, it's a dead-end street, White Birch. It's 60 extra units. We feel it's not going to overload the street, and it won't cause a traffic issue. What the public may be finding like a bit of an issue here is this is a street view of White Birch looking toward McDonald. As you can see, the road kind of narrows, and there's street parking where this SUV is, so maybe it makes a little bit tight for two-way traffic here. Maybe some, you know, no street parking signs could be utilized here if that's a major issue. And then also, like, this is the street view of White Birch looking toward our site here, which is on the left here. And as you can see, the end right now is incomplete, and has poor sight lines, and it narrows quite a bit. But at large here has done a great job of modeling of what it'll look like after, you know, we build a roundabout and we have sidewalks implemented, and it just increases the pedestrian safety and traffic safety for everybody. Affordable and rental only zoning. This was brought up in the last public hearing. The mayor kind of mentioned that there's no real funding programs that make providing affordable housing feasible in Sydney. Unfortunately, it's really challenging times to build any affordable apartments or any rental projects, period. Right now, CMHC has doubled their insurance premiums effective June 19th. That's added substantial costs to our development, about $300,000. Construction cost inflation has increased 50% since 2020. Here's some data, just in a graph showing that from some data from StatsCan, is that from the start of COVID to you know, just recently, the consumer price index is up 13%, where the Canada's residential price index is up 51%. Unfortunately, there's a new structural code that's getting implemented in December. This is going to add about $8 to $10 a square foot to our project. That's over $500,000 in added cost. So, you there's a significant amount of costs that have been added, and that's getting exacerbated by increasing interest rates, increasing construction costs, increasing financing costs, and code changes. So it's really hard to make this project to make sense of it, and we have to build attainable homes, and our goal is to still do it as rental, but I don't think we can accept a 15-year restrictive rental covenant anymore, just because we need to have that option to potentially do condo, because it's just too tight for rental as of right now. Benefit to Sydney, this was brought up as an issue that some people feel like that there's not enough benefit to the city, and I just want to highlight a few things. We're going to commit to a amenity contribution of $192,700. We're going to do the street works improvements, so that roundabout and sidewalk improvement. We're adding 12 adaptable units to the project. We're doing a large investment that helps support local industry jobs during construction, and it provides housing for people, and increases your property tax base. This is like a infill development site. We don't have to knock down existing housing. We don't have to bulldoze a forest. It's a pretty straightforward site. So we really hope to get your buy-in, and that's pretty much all I wanted to go through.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alston. Anybody else from your team needing to present?
No, that's it for us.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll move to agenda item 7A2, and that is the public participation period for this particular development application. Again, a reminder, we have 10 minutes allowed for public participation, and presenters are reminded that they should limit their comments to 4 minutes. So I'll start by asking if there is anybody who wishes to present. Yes, please. Thank you. Please come up to the podium, state your name and place of residence. Thank you.
Barbara Russell, 2055 White Birch Road. I would like to know, they have not addressed parking in their presentation today. And some of the pictures went by very quickly, so I don't know. They said, this is what it's going to look like after, and then he flipped. So I don't know where the walkways are actually going. In other words, where are the people actually walking? So I'd just like you to address a couple of those, but parking is number one on everyone living in that area is concerned. And so let's find out whether you have adequate parking for not just your 60 slips at the marina, 60 plus, that we've been told you're allocating 21 parking places to. And then the last meeting, it sounded like you were only going to have maybe half of the parking. The coulee-shaped property down there, is that still just for the marina's use? That's not a restaurant anymore? And once again, where you mentioned that the lobby was going to be on White Birch. I know in that area, everybody calls all of the roads White Birch, so I'm still not concerned. I'm still not clear on where the front of your building actually is and where the roadway will be coming in. Will it be off the circle that's going to be at the end of the road, or is it going to be down further on what really is a driveway, which everybody likes to call a road, as they call White Birch a road now, which was a lane when I moved in. So a little clarification on parking, please.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who? You can ask the presenter to answer the question. Oh, thank you. Does the presenter wish to address that question about parking?
Yes, yeah, I can speak to that. Hi, Barbara. Our development actually exceeds the parking minimum bylaw by 8 stalls. So that's all I have to mention for that.
But what amount is it? Just because you've exceeded whatever these guys are saying by 8.
Point of order, yeah.
I'm sorry, they can't hear you, and
You know, it's real easy to say that you have addressed, you've got 8 more than what I presume you guys are asking for. I still don't know, are the cars coming off the street? Or is there enough room for the cars to come off the street? Everybody that goes in there and rents is not going to be willing to ride a bicycle like Sarah. They're not going to all have motorcycles like some at the marina do. They're going to have cars, even if they're flying in for the year on a year lease. Somebody's going to get a car. Where are they going to put it? Not on the street. As when I went into the town hall, they said, well, we'll worry about that later. Sorry, kids, not later. I can give you 4 different instances just in the lower part of the island here on people that are fighting over parking, that developers all of a sudden are saying, oh, we have it, but we're going to charge you an additional $300 or an additional whatever, whether you're handicapped or not. They're even charging them $87 for parking. They're fighting literally in Langford, and the council, one of the guys went to his mommy on council in order to fight for getting his right to parking, and she called for the higher-ups to come in and dismiss the other dude that was making the complaint. Or go to Colwood Corners, where they have 3 great big beautiful 4-story or higher buildings going in without any parking. So where are they now? Out on the street. What are they doing? Fighting.
Ma'am, I think we're a little bit off topic here.
Well,
And
I'm
you've come
talking
to
about
the end.
parking.
You've come to the end of your 4 minutes.
Thanks a bunch, kids.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to present? Yes, please come forward. And your name and where you live, please?
My name is John Cook, and I live at 2029 White Birch. Just a little more about parking. So if there is a traffic assessment that is going to be required, and I think council decided that that was necessary, possibly parking on the street could be dealt with in that traffic assessment. If they're on White Birch Road, it is the only road into this development. There is only one way into this development. So White Birch won't work very well if there's cars parked on each side. People are going to have 2 cars. They're going to have a place to park. Doesn't seem to be, I don't know where visitor parking is going to be for this development. So a little bit about parking. My other comment has to do with traffic again, and there was enough concern about traffic. People did express concerns about traffic, and even you guys decided that there needed to be an assessment. That's good. So the second reapplication here has only gone from 64 units to 60. The number of cars hasn't changed substantially. We're still dealing with a lot of cars. So the traffic assessment that needs to get done has to talk about that. There's still going to be more cars. So this reapplication hasn't substantially changed in my mind. It has in some of those other things that he talked about, but not about the traffic, which is a concern here. So that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Anybody else who would like to present for this item on the agenda? Thank you. May I have your name and place of residence, please?
One. Sheila Fay, number 23-10457 Rest Haven Drive. So I live in one of the townhouses off of Rest Haven Drive there. I'm actually in favor of this development going through, and the reason being is because we are so short of housing. Being a mother of young people in the community and knowing their friends, and they're trying to raise children in this community, it is just so difficult. Now, I do understand traffic is an issue, parking is an issue, but you know what? Traffic is an issue all the way through Sydney. Traffic, if you park on Rest Haven Drive and you park on both sides of the road, it's very difficult. Breathitt Road is the same way. Almost every street we have these days, if you park on both sides of the road, it is an issue. But not taking that away from them, but I just, there's going to be probably adequate parking there, but the overriding factor of having 60 new places for people to live in Sydney and contribute to our community, I think that outweighs so many negative things that we have. And it is really the negative things that you hear from. You don't hear from many of us who want to talk about the positive aspects of what needs to happen in the community. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Is there anybody else who would like to present on this topic? Yes, please come forward.
Point of order, Chair. I would
Yes,
like
go
to
ahead.
extend the public participation beyond 10 minutes.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you.
Microphone.
Microphone.
Janet Sampson at 10461 West Haven Drive. And I noticed that there were some letters that had been written by people who were not attending today. And one of the letters cited one of the concerns I have about 60 units increasing the traffic along West Haven Drive right by the park, just before West Haven by the sea, the entranceway into where the tennis courts are. And the traffic is, the parking is horrible. The buses come down there, and it's an accident waiting to happen now. I can't imagine what's going to happen when you increase the density of traffic coming out of this new development. So that's what I've been thinking, and then I noticed that one of these letters pointed that out. So I'm very concerned that by increasing density without resolving this West Haven curve and what's happening to all the parking on that street, it's just, there are potential accidents happening, and the cyclists, they're on there as well. So, and then the other thing was just in the presentation, so am I to understand now that the developer is asking not to have a 15-year rental agreement, and that they'd like to sell as condos? Did I understand that correctly? So this changes everything.
Could I ask the presenter to respond to that, please?
Our primary goal is to build this as a rental project. Every single development we've done in our company's history has been rental. That's our intention. But the feasibility of building rental right now is so tight that, and it's a huge investment for the owners, and they have to, keep in mind they have to both sign personal guarantees for this type of development. So we like to have the option to, have it like a condominium zoning in the event that this does not make sense as a rental project in the future.
Okay, so that's clarity there. And the other issue was affordability. So the message I'm getting is that these are not going to be affordable. These are going to be expensive units going in, which may increase.
We have to build attainable housing. It's like more the goal. Affordable housing is like, no one can deliver affordable housing in Sydney. There's no government programs that make it feasible. There's nothing, there's no way anybody can build affordable housing, unfortunately, in the current environments with increased, huge construction costs, inflation, and interest rates being as elevated as they are.
So what's the difference between affordable and attainable?
I don't want to answer that on behalf of anybody else, but
Yeah.
perhaps that'll come out during the subsequent studies and future investigations when it comes before council.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else wish to, thank you, Janet. Anybody else wish to present on this topic? I'll call for a third and final time if anybody wishes to present on this topic, which is 7A zoning amendment application RZ 100107 and development permit DP 100841. No? Okay, then I will declare that the public presentation period closed. I'll now turn to our committee. If you wish to ask questions of either the developers or the proponents. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. I think just a clarification through to the applicant, if I may, on a couple of fronts. Interesting, comparisons that you provided between other fairly recently approved projects, and I'll refer to the references you made to the Oslo on Fifth. My comment to that would be that that's not a shared property with a marina. It's a very different environment, and so that did not resonate with me, so that you're aware. The other thing, through to Brent, you referred specifically to delay in approval. There's a process. This is a zoning amendment that's been required, and we followed that process. And I'll further note, as is indicated in the staff report, that development approvals have been in place. So previous development permits have been approved by councils in 2007, 2015, and 2018 on this very property, and nothing happened there with those. So I don't think you were the owner of the property at that time. I don't know if you're the owner of the property today, because that's not clear to me unless there's been a change since this recently went through council and the process. But I'm not prepared, to accept that the property, hasn't been given a fair shake. And yes, the costs have gone up. I get that. I appreciate it. It's a challenge for housing everywhere. But those two comments did not resonate with myself, so that you're aware. I was by there today at about 2:00. 42 vehicles parked in that parking lot today, serving the marina. I believe, I'll glance to staff, there's 16 parking spots for the marina. Ms. Verhagen proposed here, is that correct? I'm seeing an affirmative nod. So yeah, I'm concerned about the utilization, but I will say to residents as well, that property now, that parking lot now is a bit of an eyesore. There's campers, there's trailers. It's coming at some point. I said this last time, a development is coming to that very special piece of property, and it just has to be the right one. I've got some concerns with what was presented, and I think I'll leave my comments there unless the presenter wants to address anything that I've stated there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I presume we're just providing questions to the developer staff at this point. So
Just the developer.
yeah. So I'll try and stick to that. So it's a concern to me that you're no longer proposing this as rentals. That's a big.
Point of order, Councillor O'Keefe. Do you think you could push your microphone more towards you?
Oh, sure.
Great, thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thanks. All right. So in regards to the no longer doing the rentals, I'm just curious about, I know you have 3 rental buildings in Victoria, and I'm wondering, when those were built, did the city of Victoria require a particular length of rental tenure?
Those are, we could have sold those as condominium. We just, as I say, our group specializes in apartments, and in our history, we've never done a condominium project. So that our intention here is to do rental, but as we develop through, our drawings and go to tender this, we have to have the option at this time. Like, things are just too tight to, if we want to build anything, like, it's a fallback, we'd like to have the option to condominiumize at this time.
Okay, thank you. Getting back to the parking for a bit. So there's 16 proposed for the marina. So, and you have 60, I understand 60 boats out there. So you've done some calculation to confirm that, in July and August, there's only a maximum of 16 people that will be taking their boats out for the day?
Sorry, pardon me. I'd just like to read to you the stall assignments that we have presently on this proposal.
Sure.
So, stall assignments, there are 68 residential stalls, 1 for the marina office, and 32 for the marina berths. That's the count that we have presently.
Okay.
Thank
Okay, that's helpful. Now, those 68 residential spots, will they be, so it sounds like you're proposing to sell these as condominium units now. Will those be included, a parking spot be included in the price of the condominium, or will you be disassociating the parking spots and selling those separately?
We hope not to condominiumize. Like, as I say, our goal is to still do rental, but we just don't have that restrictive only zoning at this time, just given the current economic environment.
Okay, so the plan is one way or the other, whether it's rentals or condos, that a parking spot would be assigned to each of the residential units?
Yes.
Okay, so people, renters, so if it's a rental unit, do you anticipate that people would have to pay an additional amount per month to have parking? Or would that be included in the price of their rent?
We've modeled it out so there would be an extra parking fee.
Okay, so that's, and I guess I'm wondering what's the rationale for that? And the reason it's a concern for me is, and I think surrounding residents, is once you detach the parking from the unit, people will say, I'm gonna save myself a few bucks and I'm gonna park on the street. That impacts the surrounding neighborhood. So how do you anticipate all that playing out?
Yeah, we can't control where people park, but the cost of building underground it's extremely expensive. So we have to recoup those costs in some ways. So I mean, we're modeling, I think it's like $50 a month for parking on site, which is a very nominal fee, but it's something to help those costs that we have to incur.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that it would kind of be a drag for the local residents because people would have to park on the street, but you guys have to recoup your costs. You also talked about reducing street parking on White Birch because you recognize that it's kind of narrow for the extra traffic. So the impact to the neighborhood, it sounds to me, could be quite significant if there's not parking being provided and the additional traffic.
We exceed your bylaws by eight stalls, so we have 8 extra stalls on site. So I'm not.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
I think we adequately serve the needs of the site, and we exceed it by 8 stalls. So I mean, if we may have the odd resident that maybe parks in the street, but you could have that, in all the neighboring properties as well. Maybe a condo owner next door only has 1 stall, but they drive 2 or 3 vehicles. They can do the same thing and park on the street. I mean, they can't. No one can control that.
Okay. So, and I'll just one more question, if I may. Sure. On the topic of rentals versus condos, so it kind of sounds indefinitive in terms of what's happening here. Like, you're hoping that maybe you can do rentals, but it sounds to me like you're leaning heavily to condos. And for me, that's a pretty significant change. So at what point do you see yourselves being able to make a definitive decision on what's happening there?
I mean, we won't, after this, if this gets approved and, we would start building our drawings for the buildings, and then we would go out and tender and get some ideas of, actual construction costs on this. And then we have to model it, our costs out with cost of debt. And ideally we do proceed and do this as a rental, but it really depends on where things are going. Our interest rate's going to stay elevated, or they can maybe come down in the next year. like these things heavily impact a rental project. So we're not sure now. It's too early to say. But as I say, our goal is 100%. We would love to do this as a rental project. We do not want to do this as condo. We've never done a condo project, and we do not want to. So, and both the owners, like we own half the building, and then Lindholm Land is the other owner. They both live locally. You know, they take pride in this project, and they look at it in an extremely long time frame. So they're willing to accept a lower return metric on this building than our other projects in other cities. And that's the goal for this is, we want to keep this long term, but we don't want to be, restricted just to have, an unfeasible rental only zoning that, maybe the conditions don't improve quick enough.
So I'm just trying to get a better understanding of this. So are you saying then that if we approved this, you wouldn't want to have a rental agreement or something on the title to say that these would be rentals only, because you wouldn't be agreeing to that condition to give you the flexibility. Is my understanding of that correct?
Yes, we'd like that flexibility at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Pearson, Mr. Alston, for your presentation, answering questions, and thank you for community members who spoke on this earlier. I have to say, as a comment to start, I'm a little bit thrown because there's been information that's been brought tonight that I didn't have before I came here, and I've had no time to ruminate on it, which is disappointing. There's been some changes made and some new things come forward. I'm not really happy with that process. I just want to start by saying that. With regards to the parking and what's required, if I'm not mistaken, I thought I heard you say 68 units for the apartment, 32 for the marina, and 1 for the office? Was that correct, what I heard? I think it was from Mr. Pearson that gave those numbers?
That's correct. That's what I said.
Okay, I'm a little confused there because under our parking loading requirements, it says that we need 3 for office. So that would seem to be something that would need a variance if that were the case.
That may be the case. You would have to. I would speak to public service in this regard. The marina office is an existing site, and in our previous rendition, we've had it with 1 single stall. I don't know if that is in fact the case. Then that's something we need to look at.
Ms. Verhagen, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, thank you. So the town's off-street parking and loading bylaw does require spaces based on the types of uses proposed or existing on the property. As the staff report says on page 5 of 28 in this agenda item, the apartment dwelling units, being the residential dwelling units, parking requirement is 1 per unit at 60 units, so 60 spaces required for those. For the office space, the requirement is 1 per 40 square meters, based on 80% of the total floor area of that use. That's to take into account things like hallways and washrooms. That results into a requirement of 3 parking spaces for the office use. For the marina, the bylaw requires 0.5 spaces per berth. 62 berths in the marina results in 31 spaces for the marina. So that comes up with a total requirement of 94 spaces. Planning staff, when they were reviewing the plans, saw 100 total stalls on the site, so that creates a surplus of 6 parking spaces above and beyond what the town's bylaws require.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. You still have the floor, Councillor.
Thank you. And with regards to the surface, clearly the underground parking would be, it's going to be dedicated to people who live in the building. And you mentioned that there's, I believe, 18 or something like 18 spaces that would be a surface parking for residents. So I guess my question is, are they going to be demarcated as such, or how do we avoid having marine users use spaces that were dedicated to residents of the building?
Yes, our intention would to have those clearly identified. And back to the marina office, if I can just make a quick comment on that. That building primarily serves as an amenity space for the marina patrons. We have washrooms in there, and there's a shower, there's a laundry facility, and there's a lounge we've built out. So it's not really, I don't know if that would change, Allison. I guess the question would go back to you. If that is utilized as amenity for their marina, would that change the parking requirements?
Go ahead, Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. We'd have to review the floor plan and take a look. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Olson or Mr. Pearson, sorry.
If I may?
Anything else, or Mr. Garnett?
Yeah, sorry.
Councillor
Yeah,
Garnett, rather.
Okay, off of the parking side of it, because others have asked the questions I was going to ask. In terms of the building, and I'm looking at the diagrams, I'm wondering about heating and cooling in the building, because it's really hard to make out whether or not there's an HVAC system. Will there be cooling units supplied in each unit, or how do you propose to build that aspect?
Our intention is to have individual heat pumps for all units at this time.
Okay, thank you. If I may, Mr. Chair, question regarding trees, because staff is in the report has identified the trees that you want to take down, and I agree with the arborist. I've been there several times, and the trees are in decaying condition, and I appreciate you keeping the one on the front. With the native species, so when I looked at your landscape plan, I noticed that there was a plan for birch and western red cedar, and I've been in contact with staff on something completely different, and they advised me that the bronze birch borer is causing havoc in our community on birches, and actually they anticipate we'll lose more. And western red cedars we have seen do not do well in the drought conditions that are permeating through climate change. So I'm wondering, my question to you would be, would you be yelling at some point in time, if this ever reaches a point where it goes forward, were you willing to work with our town arborists on what is the best potential trees to plant on the property, because they have extensive knowledge of what actually thrives in our region and in this community, and it would be that, I think it would be beneficial for the long-term health of whatever you decide to plant there.
I did not know that. That's interesting. Absolutely, we would definitely work with your city's arborists, and that sounds like a good idea. We would do something to last a long time, and so that's no problem for us.
Thank you. I think I just have one more, and it's to do with something that came up tonight in terms of the development variance permit. And I'm wondering, with that setback that you're possibly requesting for the east side of the parking lot, given that retaining wall next to 10461 Rest Haven Drive has a pretty considerable amount of trees planted on it, and there is pretty extensive overhang, if there will have to be pruning to the point where those trees may suffer irreparable damage.
Hi there. If you don't mind, maybe I could share my screen. I have a site plan here that we might look at. In this instance, this is something that was brought up very recently, and so we were working with staff to quickly come up with a solution. As I mentioned earlier, our intention here is to streamline the process such that we are not asking much of the community, other than with respect to the zoning amendment and the lot coverage. So we were looking at that, but our concern is impacting potentially other things which we think may have more value to the community, like if we were to lose a parking stall, or if we were to impact the drive aisle for emergency vehicles. So we're just a little bit cautious, and we want to make sure that we vet the idea of providing that 1 meter setback, which would be from the existing retaining wall. So we wouldn't be doing any work to the retaining wall itself. We would just be pushing back away from it. So again, we'd love the time to explore that and make sure that works. I think staff is being cautious to just note that this is presently, should be noted, it should be addressed moving forward. And we hope to, again, get this variance removed from the project. But if you wish, I could share a site plan if you wish to see one. I'll let me know.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I appreciate that. I appreciate your answers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Is there anybody else who has any questions for a presenter or proponent? Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenters. Thank you to members of the public who have spoken. I would ask the presenters if they could go to what was a slide early on that I'll call the purple slide that had the
Mr. Pearson, you're muted if you're trying to speak.
I will share my screen. This is one purple slide. Are you referring to this?
yes,
one?
that one's helpful. Thank you. So, well, if you just go back without the highlighted green circles, yeah. So, in drawing the purple area, showing the building and showing the current small marina building, you've left a green space all the way around on the four sides. What does that represent?
Going back to the original demarcation of the site, this is just a layer that's a residual layer showing. Now, what that represents, in actual fact, is the 6 meter setback. It is the boundary that was established originally in the creation of the CD37 zoning. So what we were trying to demonstrate is that we've tightened up the design such that we do not, we are within that boundary still. So we're not asking for anything in that regard.
Thank you. Could you go ahead, I think it was 2 or 3 slides, to an aerial shot with the northern end of the project, and also showing the Argosy. That's the one. So my first question is, you talked about the removal of 3 units, I believe, from the north end of the building. Is that taking out if there's a 1-story, 2-story, 3-story, 4-story, so there's 4 rows there. Was there an additional row previously?
Are you asking my trade secrets? Is that what you're asking? How I managed to pull off this feat of volumetric magic? I know, I'm surprised that you picked up on that. I appreciate it. We did a lot of massaging to maintain the number of units that are accessible, fully accessible, adaptable, 3-bedroom. Those are the requirements that we had to maintain. And we wanted to maintain the character of the design as well. So a great deal of effort. I know it doesn't really appear like we've done much, but a great deal of effort was made such that we could maintain that sort of design character. Yeah, it doesn't, that's I guess the art of it is to make it appear like it was easy.
Okay, so it's leading, that question is leading to a question in terms of we see the row of trees, which I believe you were calling or describing as additional buffering that can be provided now that could not be provided in the previous development. Is the red line to the right of that the property line between your property and the Argosy property?
That is correct. The red line is the property line. The green line is the CD37 setback. We are, in addition to that, there's a gorgeous hedge that exists between the Argosy and this property. So that will be maintained as well as additional plantings such that the buffer is grown substantially. In addition to having some more landscaping in front of the building itself.
Okay, and my last question on this slide is with regards to has the distance increased from the property line adjacent to Argosy and the building? In other words, the setback.
Yes, absolutely.
And can you say by how much, please?
Let's see here. Sorry, I'm looking back here. I'm just gonna flip through my documents here. So we're presently at 8.38 meters. Previous to this, I think we were something like 5.5 meters. I can't remember exactly what we were, but we're not only are we meeting the CD37 setback requirement, but we're beyond that.
Well, thank you. I think it's important.
Excuse me, Mayor, Ms. Verhagen, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, thank you. I just pulled up the previous staff report that went to Committee of the Whole in July of 2022 when this development application was originally brought forward. That report indicated that the rear setback to this north lot line was 6.68 meters. And the current staff report indicates the rear setback at 8.38 meters, as the applicant indicated. So that's the difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate all of the information, and the reason I bring it up is because I believe it was a major concern of particularly Argosy residents of what the buffering area would be between their property and this development, and it's positive to see that it's increased to some degree. My next question is with regards to the, well, sorry, actually, while this slide is up, has the orientation of the access to the below-grade parking changed? Or is that the same angle facing the Argosy as before?
This access is a little bit of a meander. It's a little bit different. We did explore how we might impact the neighboring properties less, and had worked through an alternate rendition with the public service, but ultimately came back to this design as being the most desirable. So that's where we've landed.
Thank you. I don't really, not sure I get an answer to that, but I think, again, it was a concern of the residents in terms of that being a traffic point close to the property, and if that could be clarified, if council chooses to proceed or forward this to APC, if that certainty could be presented to APC, either way. My next question is with regards to, so thank you for those slides. I don't have any questions on other slides. My next question is with regards to the entrance that is now being created off White Birch, and can you, either through drawings or description, provide more clarity on that, please?
I will share this. I believe this is probably the best image to share, so I'll share it again. This being the site plan, this, I think in a site plan and in architecture drawings, we wouldn't generally show this much information, but I thought it was pretty relevant in this case because a lot of issues came up, and I was hoping that through this package of drawings, we might qualify more of the discussions with data and with measurements. So, in this instance, we've sort of shown, what that existing roadway width is and sort of what, we intended to be. We've shown the emergency vehicles transiting the site, their ability to move around. And with respect to, your comment here, this original design for the terminus of White Birch is something that is sort of a leftover from a previous project, and is something that we've incorporated. We believe it to be the intention of the community to complete the road in this fashion. So that's why we've shown it in this way. We really haven't put any design effort into that at all. What I had mentioned earlier and what one of the residents was inquiring about was where is the principal lobby? That was sort of a misunderstanding. So what you can see here is this is now the principal lobby right at kind of at the corner here. So this would be used, typically by visitors or by maybe the postal service or even emergency vehicles would use this as well, as this is where the fire alarm would be located. There is also another entry in the back off of the parking lot, and of course there's an entry from the parking garage below. I can show you a rendering, if you bear with me, of that.
Actually, I'm comfortable with your reply. If we could stay with this slide for a moment.
Okay.
And so the previous entrance was actually midway down the building on the west side?
Yes, that is correct. That was due to the CRU. So the CRU is located at the front corner, which seemed to be the optimal location for any kind of CRU activity. So we had sort of central axes through the building that was, in essence, a lobby on two sides. It was more complicated, and this actually alleviates that condition substantially, allows us to shift the building, as I had mentioned, and also allows for more landscape buffering. You know, it was getting a little complicated with the slope and ramping and whatnot. So I think this sort of is a nice way to resolve it. And I think the public service actually was involved in this as well, and recommended this be a location for the lobby. So we think it's a better solution.
Thank you. I have one more request with this slide. If you could, I'm more concerned with the left third of the slide. If you could perhaps expand that and just leave it at one size. So I'm wanting to see the roundabout and particularly the front entrance or front lobby area. So one of the questions that came from the public was with regards to this front entrance and what the walkways. So I see a line or a double line around the traffic circle going by what would be the front entrance, and then and so that would be sidewalk that would pedestrians would use if they were coming down White Birch on the east side, or sorry, on the south side.
Correct.
Okay, and then there's another walkway. If I'm at the bottom of the traffic circle on this slide, there's a walkway then that will go along the eastern side of the project all the way down to the water.
Well, in this case, you know, this site in particular has this sort of gradual grade. You know, at the roundabout, it's at 5 meters above sea level, and it drops when it gets down to the marina. It's at about 2 meters. So we're going to have to build up some grades such that for accessibility reasons, we can have that lobby at, you know, sort of accessible. But there is then a pathway that is in the landscape design drawings that as you pass through the island, past the existing marina facilities building, and down to the marina. So there is sort of a meandering path that takes you down to the marina.
Thank you. I do have a request for one more slide, and that was you showed a north, along White Birch to the east, or to the end of White Birch, the traffic circle, if you could, and it showed what would be the new sidewalk, continuing with the sidewalk on White Birch around the traffic circle.
I think that may be something that Brent had shown. Was it a perspective image?
Yes. Yeah.
Of this? Okay, maybe we can get Brent to pull that up.
Yeah, that's yeah. You should. This is the one. It shows the before and the after. Yeah, and so two of the letter writers this evening in the agenda package expressed concern over the extension of White Birch through that portion of Resthaven Park to connect with Resthaven. And I just wanted members of the public who are viewing this tonight to hear from you that there hasn't been any consideration of extending that roadway through the park to Resthaven.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank
so
you.
Here's a before and after.
Thank you. My next question is with regards to the terms adaptable and barrier-free units. So in the staff report, it says that the applicant has proposed a total of 9 barrier-free units and 4 adaptable units that meet the town of Sydney zoning by requirements for adaptability. Can you describe barrier-free units, please?
Sure.
And the distinction, I understand adaptable is that they aren't accessible, but they could be made accessible.
That's right. The intention is that I think that the adaptability sort of clauses in a lot of zoning bylaws lend themselves better to condominiums. And I think we sort of touched on this last time in some of our conversations, because in essence, there's some infrastructural changes that are hard to surmount, such that to widen a hallway that might have load-bearing walls, those kind of things. So the adaptability rules are built around making it very easy to convert units so people can grow old in place, or those kind of things. So that would be the fundamental difference between a fully accessible unit is something that could be occupied by a person with disabilities. And there are varying degrees, I will say, and there are different standards. And that is something that is addressed in this design. So we have fully accessible units and we have adaptable units. In your community, a fully accessible unit achieves what the adaptability requirement is intended to do. So in those cases, we are able to use those quantities against that requirement. So because in essence it exceeds it. So I hope that clarifies it.
That's very helpful, thank you. My next question is with regards to one of the amenities, if you will, apart from what would occur on White Birch and the traffic circle, is on the waterfront and the marina pathway. Can you describe either verbally or with one of your slides where that pathway goes in each direction? Is there connections to existing pathways, I guess is a question.
The public service may comment on this because this is something that you see across the nation, sort of like the public right to access the waterfront. A lot of times, I think the intention is that as properties change hands, the pathway will grow. And I think in this case, this was something that was done in previous developments, but I don't believe that there is any connection through such that you could access the park or something like that. But possibly Brent could speak to this, or someone in the public service.
Ms. Verhagen?
Thank you. Currently, there is no public pathway along the waterfront sides of the property to the east, being the townhouses at 10457 Resthaven, or in front of the property to the west, being the one that has the Argosy condominium on it. Past that, we're getting towards the district of North Saanich and Lillienhofer Park along the waterfront there, a little bit further up. So there's currently no other public waterfront walkways right in this area. There is one around Resthaven Island, and the reason that this pathway was negotiated through a previous development application but not registered on title at the time because it never got as far as a building permit was due to policies in the official community plan. Exactly as the applicant has indicated, it's common to encourage public access to and along the waterfront. So that's why this was an element of this proposal as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Mr. Pearson? Any further comment? No? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. I just want to talk about site coverage. I think it's positive that the site coverage is being reduced from, I think it's 35% to 29%, but my question is 29% of what? I mean, there was a comparison with another project in town, completed project in town. Is that 29% of the entire property that includes the marina parking lot and building?
Yes, that is.
Thank you. Another question I have is, you described amenities in the marina building. Is there an office that serves the users of the marina slips?
Yes, there's I think I don't have the exact breakdown of that marina building, but I'd say 70% of the building is like amenity space for the marina. So yeah, it has a lounge, washroom, shower, laundry facility, storage, like these kinds of things.
But the office is, the small office is staffed by, or has staff through regular business hours?
No, it does not. It's we're currently renovating, so it's just vacant, and we may occupy that ourselves after.
Thank you. Thank you again for all the information. I'll make one last note, and that is that there was a number of slides that you presented this evening, and I'm just going to call them by the names that I have. One was the the zoning comparison chart that included other developments like the Oslo. There was the traffic chart slide that had some traffic numbers. There was the street view before and after slides. There was the affordability and rental only slide that had quite a bit of text on it. I would just request, it would have been helpful to have that information in our council package, and I would make the request that if council does forward this to the Advisory Planning Commission, that information be provided to them as well. Thank you very much again, and I'll leave my comments there, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any further questions?
No, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Just going back to the adaptable and the barrier-free units, what standard are you using for the barrier-free units?
You know, we have a few emails from the previous week with the planner Richard Roy, and that was a topic that was noted. Unfortunately, I don't have that information right now, or I wouldn't bore you by leafing through my email at present. But it is something that is part of the records that we have with the public service. So maybe, I'm not sure if they would have that information handy, but we could get that to you certainly.
Yeah, that's something that I would like to see in the package. I mean, we have definitions of adaptable units. Barrier-free is something that I don't believe we have a definition for. And so that's why I'm wondering, to me, barrier-free is a step up from adaptable. So in your mind, does barrier-free mean that you would build all of those 9 units with lower countertops and lower cupboards, electrical fixtures to allow a person in a wheelchair, you know, a lower stove, lights in the unit linked to a fire alarm for deaf people? Are those the sorts of things that we would expect to see?
Absolutely. Yeah, the standards, you know, they can become quite onerous. It all depends on your approach. And it's something that, you know, we sort of examine on a case by case. In some instances, it's mandated. It may be actually connected in this project to financing. So it's something that is actively on our minds and something that we, you know, have lots of experience doing. So your assumptions are correct.
Okay, that was kind of vague for me. So it doesn't sound like you have a clear idea of what you're doing with those yet. And I guess
no, we 100% know exactly what we're doing with those.
Okay.
The drawings indicate it. You can see the difference between adaptable and barrier-free is often shown in the spaces adjacent to fixtures within washrooms, those kind of spaces where you're required to understand how one can maneuver if you have a device that you need to assist your mobility. So those kind of boxes are indicated on our present set of drawings. So the units that are accessible are shown and indicated as such, and the units that are adaptable, which also indicate some of those kind of quantitative aspects, those are shown as well. So we do know it. It's part of the package, and it's part of the dialogue with the public service.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
I'm just wondering, would this be an appropriate time to ask staff a question? Do you want to have that after, or?
That'll be coming up.
Okay, I'll wait then. Thank you.
Anything else from committee? No. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll move to the staff report. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you very much. I believe the application has been presented as proposed. Just a couple things I'd like to clarify in terms of parking. One question earlier that arose was about how parking spaces on the site would be divided up between uses. It's important to note that the town's parking bylaw has requirements for total numbers of spaces. There's nothing in the town's bylaws that requires the property owner to differentiate or demarcate or sign individual spaces to say what use they are for. So that is up to the property owner in terms of how many spaces are marked for what use on the property. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Committee questions to staff, please. Councillor Duck.
Thank you, Chair. Through to staff, you mentioned a requirement for another development variance permit that may be added to this and was discussed through the presentation. Are we holding back on the recommendation pending that additional development variance permit, or are we going ahead and it'll be added with some knowledge to us? Thank you.
Thank you. That would be up to the Committee of the Whole to make a recommendation on whether you saw fit to move it forward to advisory, or make a recommendation to move it forward at this point, or whether committee wanted to see that a variance application brought forward to them as well. That's a committee decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. And it's quite possible this question might be for Mr. Newcomb. We'll see. I was wondering, I'm trying to think long term, and so with this particular development, if it doesn't proceed and we are in status quo where we are now, I'm wondering in terms of the zoning bylaw review that's occurring, is this the kind of site or zone that staff will be looking at to possibly alter into like an RM5 low density to be in similar fashion with the rest of the neighborhood?
Through the chair to Councillor Garnett, I mean, we're not even close to that point in the bylaw yet, so I couldn't speak to this site in particular, but we certainly will review every site in town and bring forward a recommendation to council.
It was more of a theoretical, dreamy question, but I appreciate you're in a position to really fully answer it. Just as something that crossed my mind, thinking at that point, if it went to that, then there would be variances required for height and story. So I thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other, Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Through you to staff. So the notion that this wouldn't be used for rental housing was a bit of a surprise. Is that something that the developer had communicated to staff, that they were wanting to remove the requirement for a 15-year rental agreement?
Thank you. I would have to review the communication with other planning staff and get back to you about that. It was proposed under the previous development application, but that was denied by council. So this is new here. So
Thank you.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. This is just a clarification on the potential additional staff recommendation number 2. That prior to going to the APC, the developer submit the DBP for that parking setback. And you'd mentioned it was against the retaining wall. So was it that the 1 meter setback has moved in because of the construction of the retaining wall? So it's like the parking is now 0.6 meters, and then there's a retaining wall, and then the end of the property. So that is what cut into it, or it seemed like you were still unclear about how that ended up happening based on their construction drawings. And I'm trying to figure out how big of a deal this potentially was, or whether this was kind of just because of that construction of the retaining wall.
Sure, thank you. So the existing situation on the site here with that existing surface parking for the marina and office use there, the parking already is within the required 1 meter setback, but that's a non-conforming situation from a long time ago.
Okay.
It's just been continuing in this way. The retaining wall, I'd have to take a closer look at the site drawings to just determine if the retaining wall is on the adjacent property to the east or on this one. But the adjacent property to the east is higher. There's a retaining wall. It drops down to the level of this subject property here. So that it's just formalizing the existing situation, but there's more parking there going in because it would be in a longer length along that lot line there.
Okay.
So they are the latest drawing that came in did show 0.6 meter, approximately 2 foot setback for some landscaping to go in there on the low side of the retaining wall on this property, not on the adjacent side. But yeah, we'd have to see more details that would come in with that variance application.
Okay, so it sounds like this is like they need a variance permit to grandfather in something that already exists.
Well, what the situation is changing because the parking lot would be extended and more spaces would be added along there.
Oh,
And
I understand,
be
like
repaved
horizontally.
and-
Oh,
yeah,
okay, I
There'd be
get it.
more of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff. A proposal, similar proposal came forward at this location in 2022 that you had referenced previously. I recall at that time when it came before Committee of the Whole, initially it was presented as a rental project. That evolved through the course of the project, where it seemed, less likely that it would be, the developer's intent to retain it as a rental project. It was certainly the, I think, consensus around council that it looked to be developed in the manner in which the staff report is suggesting. And so the staff report notes that it's anticipated to be included as a recommendation, as a staff condition, that the property owner be required to enter into a housing agreement with the town to ensure the building remains rental for a minimum of 15 years. Having heard what you heard from the applicant this evening, does that change the staff position in terms of what you would anticipate recommending to council for this project?
Thank you. That's a good question. We'd have to find out more about it and look into that more. I can't give an answer to that right now.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Mr. Mayor.
Yes, so just a follow-up with regards to rental and the covenant. And my recollection with the last time this project came before us is that while there was understanding that it would be built as a rental, it was indeterminate how long it would remain a rental, and that if council had approved the rezoning amendment and the development application, then staff would have entered into discussions on a rental agreement, but it wasn't a condition of development approval. So in reading what Councillor Rintoul has brought forward or indicated in the staff report, and I realize some further clarity may need to come back to council, is that staff are looking at it as a recommendation now where it wasn't necessarily a staff recommendation last time. So the method by which the covenant can occur could be a condition of the development permit approval by council. That's a question through to staff. Is that one option for the creation of the covenant?
Council could make a covenant, could require a covenant on title as a condition of the rezoning, and the covenant would have to be registered before a building permit is issued. But that's a question I'll have to look more into and provide a response at a later date.
Okay, sorry, not a condition of the development application, a condition of the zoning amendment.
A condition of the zoning amendment.
Okay, thank you for the clarity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, I'll look to someone to make the recommendation. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to move the staff recommendation with an amendment. That zoning amendment application number RZ 100107 and development permit number DP 100841 for the property at 2060 White Birch Road be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment, subject to the following conditions. 1, that prior to review by the Advisory Planning Commission, the applicant submit a traffic impact assessment prepared by a qualified professional. And 2, that the applicant submit a variance application.
I have a seconder.
Second for discussion.
Councillor Rintoul, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. In speaking to the motion, I think in seeing this this development proposal come forward, we've seen many changes to the original development that came forward, and I think this recommendation, this motion that is on the floor, is for council, or for a committee to decide and make a recommendation to council as to whether or not this should go to the town's advisory planning commission. And I want to clarify for a moment what the actual process is for these applications. We have a rezoning application, we have a development application, and we may have a variance application. The process is for council to receive an initial presentation, as we have this evening, to allow public participation, to allow a Q&A from committee of both the proponent and of staff, and to indicate whether we feel it's worthy of going forward to our advisory planning commission. I think it's important to note that our advisory planning commission is a citizen-appointed body. The entire voting membership of the advisory planning committee are citizens who have volunteered and are appointed and to represent our community. And present their views, to review the various bylaws that we have, our official community plan and so on, and make a recommendation to council. And tonight, committee is not making a decision on whether this development should be approved or those applications should be approved. We're making a decision as to whether we should forward this to our citizen-appointed body. And I'm very supportive of, given that there are changes to this application, that it go to our citizen-appointed body, and that our committee hear back from that body. I would be happy to speak to a number of things that I've seen tonight, particularly the changes that I think are positive, and some that I may still have some concerns or questions on. But I think we've asked a number of questions. I think we've tried to address questions that arose from members of the public with regards to parking, the entrances, the pedestrian walkways, and parking allocation, and so on and so forth. So I'll leave my comments there, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Rintoul, motivation.
Thank you, Chair. Don't know that I'm motivating. I'll look to listen to my colleagues to see what their thoughts are on this process. I'm inclined to be supportive of the motion from the standpoint that this initiates the process. I'm very, very pleased to see the staff recommendation around the traffic impact study, because I think it's important. It was a concern certainly previously. I feel like this application's addressed some of the parking concerns we heard last time, but I don't know for a mixed-use development of this nature that some of those concerns are very real, and may require some further discussion. So I have a degree of hesitancy here, but this is the first step in the process, as the mayor noted, and I'm inclined to support the motion at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, if I may, through to the mover of the motion, could you give some rationale behind the second point? I'm asking that question because in the discussion that was presented by both the presenter and staff, it was uncertain whether that development variance permit would be coming forward, and I'm wondering if that's going to limit the progress of this motion going forward if there's a requirement for that permit or that application to come forward. Maybe you or staff could answer that question.
So through the chair, to Councillor Duck, my reason for proposing as an amendment to an additional subject to clause is that, again, we're at a stage now where we're recommending whether or not, deciding whether or not to have this go before Advisory Planning Commission. It would have been helpful for committee this evening to have further details on the variance request. I'm sure the applicant may have been able to describe it, but we didn't necessarily have the drawings that we would require and the additional information. That subject to clause means that the applicant, staff and Ms. Verhagen, staff indicated at the outset of this agenda item that staff were recently made aware of this, and they're still in discussions And there's not a certainty at this point, I don't think there's a certainty at this point that there will be a variance application. So it's subject to a variance application being submitted if it's required. And I think that with that variance application submitted to APC, they will have the information that they need to make a recommendation back to council. And then that information will in turn come back to us to consider at that time whether we have concerns. But I wanted to take another moment, if I might, Chair. I did just describe the process that we're involved in this evening. This will come before council at our meeting next Monday, because our process is to have discussion, development presentations and discussion of this nature at a committee of the whole meeting, and our recommendation is to council. That's one step. Then if council ratifies, if this motion passes and it goes to next Monday and the motion passes by council, it will go to APC, it will come back to council, and council will then make a decision as to whether or not it will go to a public hearing. So there is a public hearing required if these applications are to move forward. So there was expression of concern in one of the letter writers this evening about the process and about the public having the availability or the opportunity to provide comment. But we're in the first step of a multi-step process that we followed over many weeks. The last time the application came forward, and we'll do so with this application as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anybody else wishing to say anything on this motion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I don't know that I support this moving forward to APC at this time. Concerns for me is that the rentals seem to be completely taken out of the equation. So it's seemed pretty clear to me that they're not going to agree to a condition that there would be any sort of requirement upon them to provide rentals. And so for me, that's kind of a deal breaker. And the reason being is that, someone, it was mentioned tonight that we're desperate for housing, and that's true, and maybe we should just take whatever we can get, right? The way that I look at this is that the property is zoned as it is. They would be allowed to build 34 units. By us approving their request to recalculate the density would give them the ability to do 60 or more units. So that's a significant lift for them, a number of units that they have available. Smaller units, but still it's significant lift for them in terms of the value of that property. So the next thing I look at is, okay, how does going from 30 to 34 to say 60 plus impact the neighborhood? I think it does impact the neighborhood, and I won't go into all that again about traffic and parking and all that sort of thing. And certainly that's the case with any development that comes up. Those are always the things we hear about, concern about parking, traffic, and that sort of thing. The thing that's different in my mind with this particular development is where it's tucked in. And so places like the Oslo or other things that maybe Cedarwood that we'll consider down the road, they're not tucked away in a corner where there's only one narrow street, White Birch, for people to get in and out. So that's to me sort of an additional factor that you might not see with other developments. So when I look at that extra stress that's being put on the neighborhood, the next thing I look at is, okay, how are we going to balance that off? What is the greater good to the community? And so I was willing to consider that we would move forward with that if the greater benefit that we would get is that we would get some rental units for the community, which we desperately need. And so now we're not gonna get that. So to me, I don't see that the community, aside from it's good that we're gonna get 60 more units. There is gonna be an impact on the community. Those 60 units are not the housing that we're looking for. Those, you know, and the developer talked about this before, they're targeting, you know, it's a waterfront, it's near a marina. I have no delusions about it being affordable, but they're gonna be likely for people from out of the province perhaps that are looking for investment. So I don't, to me, it's just more of the same of what we've seen around town. And I think when there's very few parcels of land in Sydney or places where we're able to make a significant impact in getting the type of housing that we want, like rental housing. And I think anytime we have an opportunity where we can have some influence on what's going to be built there, I think we should use that, because we're going to get few opportunities. So for me, now that the rental stuff is off the table, to me, I don't feel I can support it at this time. So I won't support it going forward to APC. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Ms. Verhagen, you had something you wish to add?
Excuse me, yes, thank you. Just to point out that the applicant did indicate in their letter of rationale to council, the last sentence says, it ends to say, so we can bring new, much-needed rental housing to Sydney. And they did indicate several times this evening that their intent is to do the project as rental housing. I believe the applicant's comment was that they didn't want to be limited to that in the future if the market changes. So it does say that they are proposing this as rental housing. So just wanted to clarify that point, that is how it was proposed to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen.
Can I just?
Councillor O'Keefe.
So what I heard was that it might be their intention, but they're not willing to allow a covenant be put on the title. And so, to me, good intentions are just good intentions. And so my understanding is that they will not consent to having a covenant put on the title as for rental units. So if I've misunderstood that, but I don't think I did. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I think Ms. Verhagen addressed most of the point I was going to make, but I think for my mind, in addition to the fact that they, you know, still would likely be building rentals, as that's what their company does, they really can't afford to be bound to it. We also know that there's nothing we can do to actually get the rentals we want. The decisions was taken out of our hand decades ago about how we're going to actually be able to build things for rentals we want. Mr. Trey Levin spoke eloquently about traffic decisions and road decisions that were made decades ago, and how those affect whether or not people are going to be dependent on cars and this kind of built environment. Like, there are compromises we're going to have to make, and primarily it's going to be around things like whether people get to live or whether people get to drive. If this is supposed to be rental housing for workforce, which is what we need, then we're going to assume that at least one of the adults who live in these rentals will not have a car. They will not need a car because they will live and work in Sydney. The other person who may not work in Sydney, because it would be hard for two working adults to necessarily both get a job here, may need a car, and that's why they have a parking space. Ideally, they could start taking the bus, and we will hopefully be talking about that later when we talk about a CRD regional transportation strategy, about how we will enable that. But the reality of a renter who is a lower income person is that people who have lower incomes have to make decisions about whether they get to have houses or whether they get to have two cars. That's part of being lower income, and it's part of being working age, and it's part of being workforce. The luxury of saying we demand more parking and more driving space for people who have to make the decision about whether they're going to live in a car, like I very well might have to myself in 2 years. Won't that be ironic? To be a decision maker who can't afford to live here. Yeah, thank you. And have to buy a car so I can live in it, because that's the way reality is for the workforce. So I don't want to lose access to housing because people are making outdated decisions around traffic and parking that no longer apply or can afford to be a limitation, because we're just not going to get something better. I thank the applicant for the effort that they put in to put their project into context, looking at other roads in the area, looking at other rental buildings, and showing as many diagrams and the shadow studies as they did. I think that's helpful, and I wish more applicants would do that earlier in the process when going to public comment, because I think having that kind of understanding of the environment in which things are being constructed is very helpful. The additional information they supplied about housing and or construction costs is, I think, something people need to start keeping in mind. It's going to probably continue like that. We've been hearing about that for all of our construction projects. And so again, trying to look at what we're going to ideally be looking at versus what the world is going to allow us to build, probably for many years going forward, I think is the important context we needed, and I thank the applicants for bringing it up. I hope that by the time they get shovels in the ground, the construction costs haven't gone up so much it's no longer affordable. I guess we'll still get to keep a parking lot if so, but I'm happy with having this application go forward as it is now, because it's not going to get cheaper. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Is there anyone? Councillor Garnett. Sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank fellow colleagues for comments. I will support the recommendation just because of the process part of it. We have an advisory planning commission for a reason, and as the mayor alluded to, they are citizen appointments. And I think it's also important to note that they are a lot of them have expertise in these fields, which I don't have. So I do like to hear their feedback. It helps to me to make a decision in the future. So for that reason alone, I will support it. But I will say that I do have concerns about the rental. This coming up tonight was a bit of a shock for me. It's kind of a slap across the face that this has changed. Would have been nice to know that beforehand. And I think we can still include it as a requirement. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I have real concerns around leaving it open-ended, from the sense that if it does start as a rental building and after, say, 3 or 4 years it isn't financially viable anymore, where do the people renting there go? We now have homes for 60 potential families, and they have to now find homes somewhere where there are none, and the rental availability in the CRD is so low. So I have real concerns about that aspect of it. And I think it's also important to note, as Councillor Duncan was talking about vehicles and work, we have this premise or this idea that all people work 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. I have a son that works at midnight, 3 in the morning. He can't use transit. He lives in Victoria and he drives out to, so you have people that will live in this building that may have to have a car. They have to get to work, because there are no transit options for them. So I think it's also something important to remember in terms of parking spaces and the overall look of the building. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else at this point? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to the covenant again and the intention. I have concerns that we've some members of committee have expressed about it being new information, quote unquote, a slap in the face, that we're hearing that this that the proponent is requesting not to sign a covenant. The project came before us quite some time ago, and economic times were different then. And it was still to be discussed, even if we approved by the application. Had it approved of the rezoning application, it would have been a housing agreement, and a possible covenant would have had to be discussed by staff and the proponent. So council would have approved the development, would have approved the rezoning, and would have approved the development application without knowing that a covenant was a certainty. Economic times have changed dramatically. The proponent this evening has indicated their full intention, given what they are as a company, to build a rental building. What they've also made us aware of, or reminded us of, because I think we're all aware of how substantial the economic climate has changed in terms of rising costs for materials, for labor, for financing, in terms of inflation rate. So the proponent is indicating it's their intention to build rentals, but that given the economic uncertainties they're not prepared to sign a covenant. And the question becomes, well, if we turn down this moving forward, we won't be getting rental housing there. There's not another pathway to us getting rental housing on that property. And so I'm satisfied with the proponent's intentions of building it rental, and given their company model, that it's their intention to keep it as rental as long as it's feasible, and that's of benefit. But I think we as a committee need to appreciate that that proponents take risk in these developments. They're expensive projects, and that it was the staff, in the staff report, that the staff indicated it was anticipated to include, enter into a housing agreement with the town to ensure the building remains a rental for a minimum for 15 years. The proponent did not indicate in their letter of rationale that they were intending to sign a 15-year covenant. They stated it was their intention to build a rental.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other comments? I have something to say. I've been pretty quiet up until now, but I would vote for this motion. And much as Councillor Garnett stated, I'm a big fan of process. There's a lot of opportunity for people that are smarter than perhaps I am to look at this. I think the APC is a great vehicle for vetting these types of projects. Notwithstanding all the issues that have arisen during these various presentations and comments from council, I would like to see it move through the process, go to public hearing, and then come back before council, because I'm satisfied that if the project was meant to be, it'll go through, and if the project was not meant to be, then there are enough safeguards in the process to ensure that it won't go through, if that's the will of the majority in this case. So that's how I'll go ahead with this. If there's no other questions or comments, we'll call the question. Do we need to read back the motion, or are we all? Okay, let's just call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Councillor O'Keefe opposed. Thank you, everyone.
Chair, point of order.
Go ahead.
Or point of privilege, sorry. I would like to make a motion arising.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you. I would move. We had 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of correspondence this evening. 2 pieces of the correspondence were solely with regards to the extension of White Birch Road into Resthaven. And so my motion is that the first letter and the last letter, or the last piece of correspondence, which was an additional item of as correspondence on the agenda this evening, be forwarded to be forwarded back to council when this comes back to council.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And that's it for this one. All right, we can move ahead now to, well, I think we
Point
should
of order.
take a small recess. So we'll come back at 8:15. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I see that. So I guess we'll just move ahead to public participation. Welcome back, everyone. We'll move right away to item 7B, Development Variance Permit Application number DV 100341 at 10386 Allbay Road to legalize a non-conforming driveway that exceeds the allowable portion of impermeable parking area in the front yard. It's a bit of a mouthful. The applicant, Roger Lockwood, is not here, I don't think. So, public participation. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this? Well, we're drawn thin here. I guess if nobody's presenting, there's no Q&A. Then I'll move directly to the staff report on this. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Yes, this is an application to legalize a non-conforming driveway. The applicant had previously applied in 2021 to legalize the existing driveway. There's details on that in the background section of the staff report. Council made a resolution in July 2021 to deny the requested variance. The applicant has reapplied, and there's a discussion in the report with a recommendation that the notification be sent out as per the standard process for development variance applications. Be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions for staff? Can I have a motion to the recommendation? Oh, sorry, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. The drawing in the package, which I assume came from the applicant, you've clarified in a note previously that it was this section B that has been removed, the interpretation that this landscape patio should not have been part of the calculation initially, and hence that's the only item that's changed since it last came before committee or council. That's the first part of my question. The second part is, would this be in compliance with the removal on the part of the applicant of section C, this non-permeable sidewalk on either side of the driveway, which I assume has been calculated as part of the driveway at this point? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, to the first part of your question, area B on the drawing there, forming the appendix of the staff report, those two smaller paver areas on either side of the driveway, those are now being considered hard landscape feature areas, not part of the driveway, as they were with the original application that came in 2021. So that has reduced the overall amount of driveway area in the front yard to what you see in the staff report. The applicant is looking to just legalize the existing amount of hard surfacing, the impermeable paving, as it says in the staff report, from 30 to 38% of the area of the front yard. The parking bylaw allows 30%. The pavers on either side that were added there by the applicant, that takes it up to, I'm just looking at the staff report, the pavers add an additional 12% coverage, which brings it right to the 50% maximum permitted by the bylaw. So the part of this driveway that does not conform is the amount of concrete poured impermeable surface in the front yard.
Okay, and I take it, I'm just looking at the overhead photo and the driveway, the obvious concrete section. The dimensions don't look any different than the neighboring properties, but I take it the lot size is narrower, and hence this, it doesn't look out of place, is what I'm saying. But this calculation, I guess, just based on this lot size is the issue, correct?
Yes, it's the issue is the amount of the front yard taken up by the impermeable area, since it's more than the 30% permitted by the parking bylaw.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So just sticking with, so it's that area C. So when it was originally denied a couple years ago, So what was going to be required? So do they need to take out both section Cs? Or change those to permeable, or just one side? I'm just wondering how the percentage works out and what actually has to be reduced.
That's a good question. So the section Cs on the drawing, those already are unit pavers. That's considered a permeable surface.
So those ones are, okay.
So that complies with the bylaw. The part that does not comply is the amount of poured concrete in the front yard. So that's what they're seeking a variance for, is to legalize that existing situation.
So in order for them to comply, then they would have to shave off part of the existing driveway. Or change it to permeable pavers. Okay.
Yes, they'd have to, in order to comply with the bylaw, they'd have to convert some of the poured concrete driveway area to permeable pavers.
Okay.
To get it to a maximum 30% of the front yard area.
Right.
That is if council does not approve the variance. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Duck?
Through you, Chair, to staff, I'm looking at the overhead diagram, and I'm trying to, it looks like the property line is illustrated by the yellow line, and their concrete driveway extends over to the boulevard. Is that correct, or am I just misinterpreting this?
Yes, you're correct in that. The concrete driveway extends right out to the edge of the paved road of Allbay Road, which is common for most properties. The town definitely encourages hard surface materials within the first 3 meters of the boulevard to minimize any gravel from driveways getting out onto the paved road surface. So the concrete goes past the property line right out to the paved surface of the road.
So just a further question to that. So if they're changing that to permeable, then it would be closer to the house they'd have to change if the town requires it to be paved from the boulevard in.
It's important to note that none of the paving materials on the boulevard out past that yellow line towards the road factor into this calculation at all. This is all about what's on the private property,
Okay.
not what's on the boulevard.
Thank you. That's clarifies a lot. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Duncan?
Thank you. This is such a strange one to come forward again, and I suppose I should have kept better labeling of my folders so I could find this one. I seem to recall that this one had come even to our attention in the first place because they had built the sidewalks that were C, and that had been why they first started getting investigated as having expanded their driveway. But now we're saying it's okay, those are sidewalks, because per our bylaws, you're actually allowed to pave as much of your front yard as you want, provided it's not a driveway. Like if they wanted to pave the whole thing and call it a patio, they could do that, as long as they weren't parking a car on it. And so initially what it came down to was whether or not they were actually going to be using that as a parking surface or a walkway. But the issue we're having is that it appears that the original mistake was made during development and was the driveway itself, and not actually anything that they added to it. I'm sorry. I wish I could remember this better.
Yeah. I can provide some clarification. In the background section of the staff report, it indicates that the driveway was installed sometime after occupancy was issued. The driveway appears to have been installed at the width of the garage door, which one may think that would make sense in a new house. But that does take it over the 30% limit for hard surface impermeable materials. Had they chosen a different material, they wouldn't have been in this situation. And just to speak to your comment about there being no limit to patios or hard surfaced landscaped areas in the front yard like a pathway or a patio, that is true. The zoning bylaw or the off-street parking bylaw, they don't have regulations that limit the size of hard surfacing in the front yard unless it's for cars. Vehicle driveways and parking areas are limited by the off-street parking and loading bylaw, but we don't limit the size of patios and pathways. If somebody puts a sidewalk directly adjacent to a driveway, then it's considered part of the driveway. It's part of that maneuvering aisle, the maneuvering area for vehicles here. So that's why when you read the staff report, areas A and C are both considered part of the driveway. Part of it is impermeable concrete, part of it is permeable pavers. That's
Oh,
area
okay.
C. So the areas B, though, are decided to, determined this time to not be part of the driveway. They're the separate patio areas.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All right, can I have a motion to the recommendation? Councillor Rintoul.
I'll move the recommendation that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 10386 Allbay Road be notified regarding development variance application number DD100341 to relax the maximum percentage of impermeable vehicle parking area in the front yard from 30% to 38%, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance.
Thank you. Second.
Second?
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Councillor Rintoul, would you like to motivate?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's just about process. I guess I would like to see what the feedback, if any, is from the immediate neighbors. Like Councillor Duncan, I don't recollect all of the rationale around the discussion for what happened with this last time. I see that there's been a revision in terms of the interpretation, and that's why it's back before us. Having said that, again, from a look at the overhead view of the neighborhood, it certainly doesn't appear out of character, and I have some concern with putting this expense on the property owner at this point in time. So I'll pause there. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan, motivation?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Thank you for Ms. Verhagen for refreshing my memory on this one. I'm okay with this, it grieves me from the environmental standpoint of increasing impermeable surface, but knowing that that restriction really only applies to parking, and that if they wanted to build a hard patio, as many people do, that wouldn't be restricted. So this isn't really about whether or not we can improve stormwater infiltration, and I don't feel that this is the kind of thing we need to limit, because it's, as Councillor Rintoul said, an impact on the neighborhood or the way the neighborhood looks, and it's certainly not something you feel that the homeowners did in bad faith, because if they built a driveway to be the same width as a standard garage, it seems like a reasonable thing that reasonable people would do, and so I have no wish to penalize people for making an error like that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. I will not support the recommendation. Multiple reasons. Number one being this came forward 2 years ago and was denied. So for 2 years, there's been non-conformance. I would have liked to have asked the applicant tonight why they didn't do anything and then brought it back 2 years later. That's problematic for me, the fact that we're not following process in that case. Also, in the letter of rationale, they speak to the driveway being undersized in width for 2 vehicle parking. Well, it's not designed for that. This home is a single-family home, and at our zoning bylaws only requires 1 parking space. So, yeah, it would be inconvenient to have to park 1 in the garage and 1 behind. I did it for 10 years, 11 years. It can be done. You don't need to have your vehicles parked side by side. And I would speak counter to what Councillor Duncan said as far as stormwater management, because I think that's why we have permeable, impermeable in our driveways, is to help with stormwater management. And maybe 1 house isn't going to make a difference. But if we set this precedent and everybody comes back asking for the same thing in our whole community, it may seem exaggerated, but then it does have an impact. I mean, I'm assuming we have these percentages for that reason, to help with our stormwater management. So either we need them or we don't. So to me, it makes no sense to just say in this particular case, well, it's not that big of an area, so it doesn't make a difference. It all makes a difference when you look at it from a whole contextual point of view. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I concur with my colleague, Councillor Garnett, in that one of the things that Ms. Verhagen mentioned, that the driveway was poured after the occupancy was given, and so the owner knew what was required to put that driveway in and didn't adhere to it. So I concur with the decision that was made 2 years ago, and the owner has done nothing in 2 years. So what has changed? And in my mind, nothing. So I will not be supporting this motion.
Anybody else? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Chair. I also won't support the motion. So I did pull up the report in my notes from July 13th, 2021 to take a look at what we talked about back then. And yeah, I'm surprised. I was shocked that why is this coming back to us? We rejected it 2 years ago. We had good discussion about it and rationale, and staff apparently immediately after our decision went to the homeowners. They let them know that they were in non-compliance. They've been there several times to say, you need to fix this. And they've done, as I understand from additional information from staff, they haven't done anything. So I don't know if they're just thinking, okay, well, 2 years has gone by, maybe they'll change their mind now. So in terms of, process, I don't like that we would make a decision 2 years ago and really nothing significant has changed. It's, yes, there's some areas, the patio, those other areas that are not being factored in, but the basic thing of the size of the driveway was the issue, and it's still the issue. The point that, Councillor Garnett made is that this property is designed for, they're required to have one spot, and that one spot was covered within the garage that was provided. So when you go by there, in the initial letter from the applicant 2 years ago, some of the things they said they needed the extra space, an extra wide driveway in order to have wheelchair access or more accessibility, easier to maneuver in and out. Well, that driveway is wide enough for 2 cars. I've gone by there a couple times. If you're having a big party, yeah, maybe it would be nice that you could have more space. But if you're just pulling in there with your car, there's plenty of room to maneuver and get through. So in terms of that argument and the accessibility, to me, it's unfortunate that they didn't look into it more when the house was being developed and they poured the driveway without looking into it further. That's unfortunate for them. It's unfortunate that there's going to be a cost, but yeah, it's I guess unfortunate for them. And so I don't feel a need to change our mind 2 years ago. I'm satisfied with our original decision. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. And a question through you to staff is, in looking at the drawing on the back page, and that the driveway, which is impermeable, is identified as A. What portion of that would have to change to permeable to meet the bylaw?
Well, 8% of the driveway, 8% of the front yard is over the maximum 30% of impermeable surfacing. So I'm just going to look at a response that staff had sent to council questions previously about this. It'd be about 8% of the front yard. The front yard has a total area just over 101 square meters. I think it's just a little bit larger than that. The appendix on the staff report here, where the applicant calculated their front yard area, they missed an area that is a width of 0.91 meters by the entire width of the property, which is approximately 13.5 meters. So they would have, in order to comply with the bylaw, they'd have to remove, I'd say, approximately between 8 and 11 square meters. That's a rough guess done off the top of my head. I could provide a more accurate response by looking at it more. Thank you.
I appreciate the calculation on the fly. What I need clarity on is, from the initial discussion and reading of the staff report, my understanding was that the impermeable driveway identified as A would have to reduce in size. to meet the bylaw?
Yes, that's the case. The impermeable driveway, area A, the poured concrete, there's a maximum of 30% for impermeable surfaces for driveways in the front yard, and that driveway represents an area of 38%. So they'd have to reduce some of it away to meet that 30% maximum.
Okay, so they would have to change a portion of a calculation representing 8% of the front yard of area A. They would have to change, but then you are also saying that in terms of the total permeable / impermeable area, that has to reduce as well.
No, the drawings here, areas A and C combined equal 50% of the front yard. That complies with the bylaw. The overall number complies. Just the amount of permeable versus impermeable surface does not comply.
Okay. What I'm trying to arrive at is, I don't know what the measurements of the driveway are. Let's say it's 20 feet by 50 feet. Is if they have to remove, if we deny the variance request, they would be required to change what is appearing to be a relatively small percentage of the permeable driveway to impermeable driveway to permeable. Is that statement correct?
Yes, if the variance request is not granted, they would have to do that in order to comply with the bylaw. Remove some of the concrete or replace it with a permeable surface to reach that 30% maximum in the front yard. Okay. I'm sorry, I deal in square feet, and if somebody told me they had to change 10 square feet or they had to change 15 square feet, it would be meaningful to me. In meters, I have a little challenge, but I don't know what that calculation is, and I'm not going to have staff to make it. I'm understanding or appreciating that it is probably a relatively small portion of the driveway. The comment was made through questioning by committee of the driveway being poured after the occupancy permit was provided. But at what time would the area of the driveway have been considered? Would the area of the driveway had been in the original plans submitted? As indicated in the staff report, this property is not in it's not in an environmentally sensitive development permit area, so there's no development permit requirement for constructing new houses on this or other properties on the west side of Allbay Road. So it's just a building permit application. Often the driveway area on a building permit application, when there's no DP required, is a rough guide, and planning staff will look at it, and if there's enough detail, we would comment on it. If there's not, then it's up on the property owner to follow town bylaws when installing a driveway.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate that clarification and reminder of it within the report. And I think that, as a colleague has said, that if they had followed the process, and accurately, the impermeable area A of the driveway would have been smaller, or that area would have been the same size, because presumably you would want your driveway to be the width of the garage, but they would have had a portion of it. Maybe the portion closest to the road would have been, it's without a sidewalk, a curb and sidewalk on that area. Maybe that portion would have been impermeable. I think we're talking about a relatively small area and a reasonable mistake on the part of the builder in this case. So I will support the variance request.
Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, just to clarify, you had mentioned earlier, I believe, that the impermeable would have to be closer to the house, actually on the property, not towards the street, right? Is that correct? My understanding?
If I can provide clarity, I indicated that the the change to permeable surface would be a portion of the driveway on the private property.
Sorry, I misheard you then. Thank you.
Closest to the road.
If I could add in, the off-street parking and loading bylaw pertains only to private property. It doesn't pertain to any areas on the boulevard.
Thank you.
I've got a couple of comments. I'll vote for this motion. Looking at the aerial photo, I see approximately 4 houses that all have virtually identical driveway sizes. I'm not sure why this particular address is being singled out in this case. One of the consequences of taking larger properties and slicing them in half and making smaller properties is that we're expecting to have the same types of amenities on these very narrow properties that we had on the larger properties. And maybe that original 30% number made perfectly good sense when you had, say, 120 feet of property width. In that case, you'd have enough permeability in the front of the property that an impermeable driveway of the size and consistency of the proponents would not be an issue at all. But part of our OCP is to increase our density, and one of the ways of doing that is by slicing these properties in half and building 2 properties where there used to be 1. And this simply, to me, is a consequence of that. And I think that it's unfair to penalize somebody who's come in and purchased one of these properties, whether he purchased it after it was built or partially built or whatever, to penalize him for something that he really doesn't have a lot of choice. I've been to that property, and the driveway is the width of the garage. You can't make it a heck of a lot smaller. It doesn't make sense. And it goes as far to the street as it can go. So I agree with Councillor Rintoul as well that it would cause undue hardship to have to remove a very small portion of this driveway to make it permeable. It's as though we're working at cross purposes. On the one hand, we're creating these narrower lots and building new houses on them, but then we're holding the owners of these lots to a higher standard than we would have if the original size lot had been maintained and a new house had simply been built on that. So for those reasons, I'll support the motion. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I'm still not in favor of this motion, and I'm a little concerned that council of 2 years ago chose to not move forward with this variance, and yet here we are 2 years later with only 2 different members of council, and we're leaning towards approving this variance. And that concerns me because it means that that person non-conformed for 2 years, waited it out, and has done nothing, and now they can come here and sort of get us to approve it. That's concerning, and Councillor Garnett mentioned earlier, is because we're now opening that door to, okay, don't do anything, wait, see what happens, and maybe you can get a new council or a different opinion. And Ms. Verhagen did identify that the other lots on there are larger size and such that they can accommodate the percentages that are required, and that's our bylaws, that's our requirements, that 30% has to be permeable or impermeable. So I'm now concerned that council is reversing a decision they made 2 years ago with no change to the content of that development. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan and Mr. Mayor.
Sure, I'll explain why I would change my vote. Because impermeability is based on our broad area, not just how small, as Councillor Novick said, we can slice these lots, and if one ends up smaller, it gets to be a driveway that's arbitrarily smaller than all its neighbors, when all we did was increase the impermeability in the entire area by cramming more yards onto it in the first place. It's about sticking to rules whether or not they make a difference in reality, and sticking to rules whether or not they actually achieve the objective we'd be claiming to make, which is stormwater management with the impermeability. The second thing is that what was changing was looking at the way that B area was included, and now knowing that they can put in a concrete landscape patio that's impermeable, that could be right off that driveway, and park a car in it and just say, oh, it's actually a patio, but I'm illegally parking my car on it sometimes. And they'll get away with that. That's perfectly fine. People do this all the time. Because it's not about the actual amount of impermeable area. We're very clear about that in our bylaws. It's about whether or not you're parking a car on it. And so if you're the kind of homeowner who's gonna care about making sure you can get your 2 cars on there, just like everybody else on their block, what you're gonna do is rip up the 0.82 meters along the side of your driveway to make that permeable sidewalk, or the 1.5 meters at the end of your driveway. I just did the calculations to get that 8 square meters. And then you're gonna pave something else. Maybe you're gonna pave over right on the side, you know, next to that at the back of your driveway, or at the front closer to the road. But because that's not going to be considered part of the driveway, but you wanted to get what everybody else on your block got anyway, and you had the money to pour that concrete anyway, that's just what you're gonna do. So I'm changing my vote here just to make it so that we have something that is a sensible solution that deals with the realities of how stuff is built, rather than getting people to go around it based on a technicality, which is what people will probably do.
Any other questions, comments, motivations? We have motion on the floor. Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Duck, Councillor Garnett, Councillor O'Keefe opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Item 7C. This is about development variance permit application number DV 100344 at 2306 Beacon Avenue to allow an existing ground floor commercial unit to be occupied for office use fronting onto Beacon Avenue. Do we have presentation from the applicant, Mr. John Shields? Welcome. I'm sorry to have kept you so long. Please come to the podium, press the button, and we're happy to hear what you have to say.
Thank you for hearing this. It's co-working spaces have become a driving force in the modern workforce, providing an alternative to traditional office settings. However, our research has identified a significant gap in our community's access to such spaces. Our proposed co-working space seeks to address this gap by offering the following key features. Community hub. Our co-working space will serve as a hub for local professionals, entrepreneurs, freelancers, and small businesses to come together and exchange ideas. It will provide an environment conducive to networking, knowledge sharing, and collaboration, fostering a sense of community among its members. Versatile workspaces. We plan to offer a variety of workspaces, including private offices, dedicated desks, and open work areas. This flexibility will cater to the diverse needs of our members, allowing them to choose a setting that suits their work style. Social integration. A distinctive aspect of our co-working space will be its emphasis on social interaction. We will organize regular events, workshops, and networking sessions to encourage meaningful connections among our members. These events will not only enrich their professional lives, but also contribute to the overall vibrancy of our community. Supportive ecosystem. In addition to physical space, we aim to provide a supportive ecosystem. This will include access to resources such as mentorship programs, business development services, and educational opportunities, empowering our members to thrive in their endeavors. It's also an amenity for the hotel. There's a lot of business travelers who spend time there. This is sort of a very robust business center. But ultimately, co-working spaces are very social in their nature, and it's bringing people together. So I think the intention is there's a lot of interaction with the street, and it's not your typical office. And I think that just needs what we're trying to explain. So I think I'll leave it to questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Duck?
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarification, has that facility, which was formerly a restaurant, has it been converted to accommodate this kind of activity?
Nothing's happened with it since the restaurant's closed.
Thank you.
Any other question? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for attending this evening. Currently, the landscaping on Beacon Avenue is approximately 4 feet from the building to the sidewalk. It's fairly substantial in terms of bushes and that sort of thing. But there is a series of windows across the entire frontage. Will those windows remain, and will that landscaping remain?
The windows will certainly remain. The landscaping, there's been some discussion about changing the landscaping, but I think the green space itself will remain.
So, I mean, one change is right on the intersection corner, is that will be the main entry from the street into the offices?
No, I think the entry will be off the parking lot, the existing restaurant entrance.
Okay, is that then an emergency?
Yes,
exit?
yeah, which will remain.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Yes, so I think one of my questions was addressed by the mayor. So there will be no interaction sort of right along Beacon. It's going to be the original entrance. So when you talk about interaction with the street, what will that look like?
I think the differentiation is just the amount of traffic with Beacon. The people arriving for hours at a time. Part of these co-working spaces is there's a certain amount of space dedicated to walk-ins. So people come in and work for a couple of hours, very much like you might go to a coffee shop and work on your laptop. So the interaction is just people coming and going. So it's not sort of a static office where there's just a few people in and out during a day.
Okay. Did you consider any other venues or locations within Sydney?
No, we haven't.
Okay. I'm just thinking about, so from what I'm understanding is that there's not really, aside from people coming and going in and out, there's not really a lot of, when I'm talking about interaction, I'm talking about, being able to stroll down Beacon and look at things in the window, so there's not going to be that kind of, and I'm thinking that this sort of thing sounds like it would be, you would generate the same amount of traffic if you were, say, on a second floor, I presume, people coming in and out, except they go up a stairs or elevator and they're on the second floor.
Yeah.
I would presume.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Duck?
Yeah, just say, this would be like a mini version of Quench.
Yeah, very much, yeah.
Yeah, so there would be different sizes of workstations and meeting rooms and feels it. Awesome. It's a long time coming, so I congratulate you on bringing something like this to Sydney. Thank you.
Thanks. There's also an element of, there's a gym at the hotel and showers for people who cycle to work, and so it feels like the right location.
Any more questions? No? The next portion of all this is public presentation. Of course, there isn't any. Thank you very much, Mr. Shields. And
thank you.
We'll see if we can get a motion to the recommendation. Oh, sorry. Yes, you're correct. Staff report, Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. The application is outlined in the staff report. It's a variance to allow or to relax the conditional use regulations for office at ground level along Beacon Avenue. There's a specific condition in the zoning bylaw that says for lots abutting Beacon Avenue, excluding real estate offices and travel agencies, this use is prohibited to front along the street on the first story. So the space being proposed for this office use is on the ground floor abutting Beacon Avenue. That's why the variance is requested. The report does contain a number of policies from the official community plan about ground floor space on Sydney's downtown core. Also some additional comments about the use of like the diverse mix of commercial uses we're hoping to get in Sydney's downtown, as well as viewed from an economic development lens as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Verhagen. Any questions? Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Chair. This is just more of a clarification. In the staff report, it's listed as an address of 2306 Beacon Avenue, and in the letter of rationale, it's listed as 2302 Beacon Avenue. Are these addresses interchangeable, or should it read 2306? Just for my clarity's sake, which address we're actually talking about.
Thank you. The civic address of the main parcel of land is 2306 Beacon Avenue.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions for staff? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Chair. My question, and I'd like to wish to go back to the proponent, if I might. I appreciate that the presenter this evening is the designer, but if I might, Chair, through the presenter, do you have an estimate, or do you know the age, the length of time that the restaurant operated in that space? I know it's decades, but.
I don't. For quite a long time.
Okay. No, thank you.
Councillor Duck?
If there's no further questions, I'm prepared to make the recommendation.
Go ahead.
I move the recommendation that owners and tenants in the occupation of the property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 2306 Beacon Avenue be notified regarding development variance permit application number DV 100-10034 to allow office uses to be located on the ground level along Beacon Avenue, and that any written correspondence received to be forwarded to council at the time of consideration and approval of the variance.
Point of clarification. Is I believe it's 100344. Is different listed on the front as it is in the actual recommendation?
Yeah, it looks like a typo. There's an extra 100 there.
Yeah. So yeah, just DV's 100344.
Second.
Second, Councillor Rintoul. Any discussion? Councillor Duck?
Just like to motivate if necessary. I think this is a welcome addition to Sydney. There is one other sort of small business incubator, and this will, I think, provide an opportunity for those small operators to be downtown and kickstart their businesses, and something that will bring new businesses eventually to Sydney. So I think this is a great opportunity. I think it's a great location in combination with Best Western, and there's plenty of parking there that will be available to people that come and go from this place. The egress is off Beacon, so they're not going to be coming in on Beacon. So I think the impact on Beacon is limited. So all around, I think it's a great opportunity for Sydney to move on.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll concur with Councillor Duck. I think the applicant, his representative, answered the question well with respect to how vibrant the center will be in terms of targeting people who are coming and going. So you're going to see that sort of flow of movement through the building. Not unlike a restaurant where if you peek in the window, you see someone lifting their spoon or fork. We're going to see people coming and going, and a hub of activity there. So I think it's a positive thing.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I support it. It's I was going to actually say that the previous use was a restaurant, and unlike Councillor Rintoul, I never looked in the window to watch people eat. So I'm thinking along the lines of that's probably been the kind of way that's operated for a very, very long time, and there is not a lot of foot traffic. So I think the little rationale is well laid out, and I'm fully supportive of it. And I think it'll be intriguing to see what happens. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I take a little bit of a different view on this. First of all, I'd like to say I really like the concept, and I agree that this is something that's needed in Sydney. When we're having consultations with the business community during the OCP, this is something that came up to have this kind of hub. So I think it's a good idea. I support that, but I don't support it in this location, ground floor space on Beacon, and for a few reasons. So we've just gone through a lengthy and in-depth OCP process, And as staff outlined in the report, we talked in our policies about preserving Beacon for retail businesses. And no time in the discussion did somebody say, you know what, that corner up by Smitty's, that's something that we really don't need up there. Let's take that out. Let's take that out of the plan in terms of future retail space. That never came up. The thing that came up was we need to maintain our spaces on Beacon for retail use. The need for that, you know, and I guess you could argue, well, it's been a Smitty's for 20 years, and, you know, a restaurant, and I agree that this would probably have just as much more traffic. However, what concerns me is that we're losing an opportunity for space for future retail. And that was something that was kind of reinforced to me this week. There's an article in the P&R about a new business that's set up on Beacon, home decor business, someone who's come here from Vancouver. And they set up here, and they talked about how hard it was to find space, retail space. Although that retail suffered during COVID, it's making a big comeback. And Sydney is a desirable place, especially Beacon, to be. And so what I worry about, although this is a great concept, I worry that we're taking a good chunk of space out of circulation for retail. There's really very few places for our retail sector to expand, so that's a concern for me. Another thing we often hear about is the price of retail space. And because there's so little of it, a lot of businesses on Beacon pay big rent, I hear. And so I worry again that taking a big chunk of retail space off of Beacon contributes to a shortage in space. Let me see. I think, as I said before, this is, you know, in the staff report, you know, it mentioned that this is kind of a underutilized area anyways. There's not much retail traffic there. Well, that's the case because it's been a restaurant for 20 years. But I think there's still potential to have additional retail space there. So as I say, I think it's a great concept. I would love to see it in Sydney, but I just don't think this is the right location. I'm concerned about cutting off further space for future retail expansion. So I won't support the motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duck?
I think, have you spoken, Commissioner? So, yeah, I've spoken once, so.
Do you have something? Yes, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you, and I appreciate the comments from colleagues. And I mean, one of the reasons that that office space is not permitted on ground floor on Beacon Avenue is to ensure a street interaction with patrons and a vibrancy in our downtown. I think given the current design or frontage on Beacon Avenue, what it's been for at least 20 years, if not 30 years, is that there is approximately 4 feet of landscaping up and just slightly above the windows that go across the property. And that the only permitted use at the moment is, I think it was in the staff report, is restaurant or a gathering space of some sort. So if you look to want to maintain this space, and it's a fairly large, it is a large space, if you consider it from a retail point of view, it would be a larger space. A retailer, and I'll just use the example of a clothing store, is that it's pretty much necessary for a retailer like a clothing store, and there'll be many other retailers that would be in the same situation, is that you have to have direct street interaction with Beacon Avenue. You need windows. I mean, think of the clothing stores we have downstairs and the size of their windows and what they're displaying in those windows. And there's many other types of retailers that are doing the same in their windows. So what we're asking, if we deny this request, what we're in effect asking the proponent to do is actually redesign the frontage of that building. And it's a fairly significant size to attract a retailer, because having been in retail for 23 years in Sydney and many years beyond that elsewhere, it's highly unlikely that a true retailer of inventoriable goods, dry goods, is going to go into a location like that where they don't have a presence on the street. And so to expect the proponent to convert that, to go to the expense of converting that space into real retail frontage, I think it's accepted, and I'm happy it's landscaped the way it is, and that there are windows there as frontage. But I think it's unrealistic that even if the proponent went to great expense, and it would be in excess of $100,000 to renovate that to be store frontage like you see elsewhere on Beacon Avenue, that it would then suddenly attract a new retailer to that space. So I'm supportive of the nature of the business. Agree it could succeed in other locations or on other levels, but I think when considering the circumstances of this particular location and why we have office space and why we're permitting it, or considering permitting it in this case, I think it's reasonable to approve this variance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to turn to Ms. Verhagen for a moment.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a point of clarification on the staff report. It does not indicate that the only permitted use in this space is a restaurant. The property is zoned downtown commercial, which permits a long list of permitted and conditionally permitted uses on the property and in this space. So I just wanted to clarify that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I just want to supplement the mayor's information there that the landowner had started to move on putting a restaurant back in to replace Smitty's, to the point where they put a restrictive covenant on the sublease holder of what was formerly Mother Nature's, and essentially drove them out of business because they didn't want competition for their restaurant in the same area. So I'm probably, this is the next step for the landowner to look at alternatives that still work with the hotel there and the operations of, as which the presenter mentioned, that this interaction will be there, important for business people coming and going from the Best Western, and there's a direct access from the hotel through the back. So it would limit prospective retail because you not only have to create an outdoor access to Beacon, as the mayor suggested, but you'd also have to renovate the back end so you can close it off to the rest of the building, so to give it that proper operating hours. So I think it's a good use of the space, and I think it's a good position for it. Thank you.
Any other comments or motivations at this point? Then we'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor O'Keefe is opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item 8, staff reports. There are no staff reports, but we'll move to item 9A, the CRD Transportation Governance Engagement, a workbook facilitated by the mayor. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Mayor McNeil Smith for this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. And to colleagues, I think we have a very informative workbook package from the Capital Regional District, the CRD, regarding transportation governance engagement. There's several pages of information about the process that the CRD is undertaking with regards to its current transportation service and consideration of a future regional transportation governance model. I think it's just important to note in a brief introduction that the purpose of this workbook, which includes a survey portion, if you will, is to allow the opportunity of the 13 municipalities, the 3 electoral areas, and partner agencies such as BC Transit and BC Ferries to provide input on potential changes that will help achieve the CRD goals of transportation mode share change and greenhouse gas reduction targets. And this workbook, which asks questions in different formats, I think is at a very high level, and that submitting a response to or submitting a completed workbook does not bind this council to any future possible particular governance models. It's indicating at a higher level our preferences for regional versus local priorities, and there is a page at the beginning, near the beginning of the workbook, that talks about the timeline process, and there's another chart. Forgive me, what it is. There's a three-step process on page 6. There's level 1, level 2, and level 3. And so the CRD board set its board strategic priorities at the beginning of the term for the 4-year term. And then the staff corporate plan came forward. And in the staff corporate plan, it is to proceed through those 3 levels. And the first level is a new CRD service. So it's actually revising the existing service, consolidating transportation functions and regional trails. The second is expanding CRD authority with regards to some of those functions. And it's not until level 3 that we actually are contemplating a new authority and possibly streamlined decision-making and investment, which is what this workbook is primarily addressing. And then on the following page, on page 8, it talks about the timelines from summer of 2023 until 2026 and beyond. And we see that creating a business case for a possible business case for transportation authority isn't until 2025, 2026, because the CRD board, CRD organization wants to see success with those first 2 levels that are spoken to earlier. So, Chair, what I would like to do is I would like to put a motion on the floor, have it seconded, and then before motivating, perhaps colleagues on committee could ask any questions in terms of the rationale for particular answers, or comments with regards to the answers as provided in the workbook. And so I'll move that the CRD Transportation Governance Workbook and accompanying notes, which are in the Excel spreadsheet, be approved as presented and submitted to the CRD.
Can I have a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Rintoul, thank you. Go
And
ahead,
so again,
Mr.
I
Mayor.
won't motivate at this time. I think I've, through the introduction, I've indicated where this workbook fits in terms of CRD process, that it's not committing council to particular future governance models per se, that if and when that proceeds, it would be coming back to municipal councils for approval, and there would be more specifics on what powers the new governance model would have in terms of what modes of transportation it would cover, and what the funding model would be for such a new governance structure. And so, just with my experience on both the CRD Transportation Committee and the CRD Board, I've in the questionnaire, and more so in the Excel spreadsheet that includes notes, tried to provide rationale for the responses within the workbook. So I'll open it up to colleagues if there are questions or comments on the workbook itself.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a question. So I'm looking at what is this chart on page 7. So it shows examples of transportation governance models in other jurisdictions. And the way that I'm understanding this is that in all cases, the provincial highways would still be under the jurisdiction of the provincial government, or would we propose to bring those into our regional authority?
Thank you for the question, through the chair to Councillor O'Keefe. I think what we see in this workbook is that there are several modes of transportation provided that a transportation authority could have authority over. And so one of them is roadways, and the roadways are of two types. There are the provincial roadways, which is Highway 17, Highway 1, and Highway 14. And so on those roadways are not only the roadways themselves, but the intersections or the interchanges, and there are many between here and Souk along those three provincial roadways. And so in some of the governance models provided and other governance models that are out there, those provincial roadways would remain the jurisdiction of the provincial government. However, a regional authority could speak to priorities within the region in terms of improvements or changes. And I think Mr. Chalevin, when he spoke during public participation, was talking about priorities, as a priority setting process, that involved the 3 municipalities on the peninsula, for the peninsula portion of one of the provincial roadways. But quite frankly, from a provincial standpoint, their communication has been that it would be helpful to the province if we set our priorities on a regional basis, rather than them having to have every municipality come forward with their priorities on provincial roadways and then make a determination of which is the priority. So that's just one mode. Then there's local roadways. So you could see examples. Would they have authority over local roadways? Would they have authority over roadways that I would call sub-regional? So, for example, where we formed a partnership with North Saanich and the Airport Authority for the realignment of Stirling and the Gallarin traffic circle. Well, would a regional authority have some jurisdiction or a role of advocacy or funding to contribute to that level? So you can talk about roadway at a provincial level or at a local or a sub-regional level. You can then talk about regional trails. You can talk about about cycling corridors within municipalities or cycling corridors that are on a sub-regional level between municipalities. You can talk about sidewalks and transit. And so really this questionnaire is not, for the most part, asking council's opinion, all of the councils, what their opinion is at this time with regards to what authority a regional governance authority would have over each of those modes of transportation. It's really looking for us to gain an appreciation, if we don't already have it, of what the local needs and regional needs are within those different modes, and expressing our views through the workbook. Does that help?
Yeah, I guess, I'll support the motion. I guess my comment, sort of general comments is, see how it goes. But I think about Beacon Roundabout, and I'm thinking, if we had a regional authority, would that have been, I don't think we would have done it as fast. I think, like, locally, I think, like, our staff in North Saanich and the airport did a great job at pulling that together, tendering it, and it's in place, and it's gonna be done by the fall. I can't imagine a regional authority getting that done, like, within maybe 3 years if we're lucky. It would have to go to, a strategic planning session and be looked at, and so I guess when they're looking, as I read through the workbook, and they're looking at what are some of the things, concerns, so one concern for me was our ability to react quickly to local things like that, and as a small community, that we're gonna get, maybe not the level of service that we would like. When I look, for example, with the Lochside Trail, that Lochside Trail is a terrible mess, and that's under the control of the CRD. They recently decided to borrow millions of dollars to put into regional trails, and I understand that there's a lot of other trails, so they can't be too bothered with Sydney out here, but there's no plan in the near future to fix that trail. So those are some of my concerns. I'm not going to vote against this, but if they're looking for, in this worksheet, what are some of the issues for me? those are issues that would be of concern.
And thank you. If I may just comment briefly, I think, those are some very valid points, and it comes out through some of the questionnaires. I think with regards to the traffic circle, I mean, it's been 5 years. The discussion on doing the transportation study and the project itself is 5 years old. In fact, it'll be 5 years, almost 5 years when it's completed. And yes, it would be a question in terms of how quickly a regional authority would do that. I'm not suggesting, again, I'm just giving an example of what specifics would be determined farther down the road in this process. It's not part of this. However, anticipating concerns such as that, I did indicate in the very first note under 1A, we support current municipal taxes and external funding that we can access, such as we did for the Beacon traffic circle, remaining committed to local projects. We support a new regional governance and funding structure for regional, sub-regional projects on transit, roadway, trail, sidewalk, and bike lane projects. So again, it's not committing to particular modes and to particular authority, but it is expressing the concern that that local jurisdiction is still important to us. And I think it is also included in a couple of the other notes, particularly on the one with regards to active transportation.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, you still have the floor.
Sure. And just getting to the Keating flyover, since that was kind of something that was brought up. So the way that I understand what happened there is, the peninsula thought that was, a high priority, and identified that to the provincial government, and they decided to do what they wanted to do anyways, without, talking about if the provincial government is still going to maintain control over Highway 17, Highway 1, other things like that, we can come together and say, here's what we want, but in the end, they decide what they want to do, whether it meets our needs or not. So that would be a concern for me. And then once you factor out Highway 17 for Sydney, what's left is our local stuff, and whether I would want to give that up to a regional authority to decide, what we're going to do on Resthaven or Beacon. I would have concerns about that. So.
No, thank you. But again, a regional governance model, and Mr. Trelevin in his comments this evening spoke to TransLink and how the province brought several hundreds of millions of dollars as funding to that regional transportation authority. One of the reasons of moving to a regional transportation authority in the CRD is that there would be regional priority setting in certain modes of transportation, but because a regional transportation governance authority has to have provincial approval to be put in place. I think that's indicated in the workbook. Is that there would be then funding from the province that would be with that authority. Would that allow projects to proceed differently? If you take the Keating flyover, the municipality of Central Saanich put, I think, $2 or $3 million into that project, and the federal and the provincial government put much higher levels of funding into that. And while it's true that advocacy for a Keating flyover has been ongoing for 30 years or more, and that for a couple of years we did have a tri-municipal priority setting committee, that a regional governance model may be more successful in meeting the regional priorities of transportation. There's not a certainty, it's to be explored. So I'm hoping some of the concerns that Councillor Keefe has expressed and that others may have are noted in the comments within the workbook.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I support in nature what's been done. I just would like to know that you
Microphone.
Sorry, I in a sense concur with the direction here. I'm just concerned that the workbook that you've completed and are advocating in the motion to approve and present to and submit to the CRD is your views alone, and I would like to know if my colleagues concur with the decisions made in that workbook as we move forward, because it would be representative of Sydney. So I would be, although I'm in support of the workbook and the content of it, I'd like to know that all of us concur with the decisions and views made there, because they represent Sydney. And right now, they just represent what you've completed in that workbook. And that, I mean, I don't know what the timeline is on this, but I think there might be an opportunity that we should go through and make sure that we all concur on the answers provided.
Well, thank you, Councillor, through the chair to Councillor Duck. Thank you, but that's what I intended after I gave my introduction and I put the motion on the floor. I said now was the time for committee members to ask their questions and provide their comments with regards to particular questions within the workbook.
Just ancillary to that is that, and that's the point, is that now we need to go through each one of those questions, and we can't depend on, I can't depend on my colleagues to say they agree with ones that, I don't know, because they're just not asking questions about.
Okay, so the intention of providing the completed workbook in the agenda package rather than coming with a blank workbook to the meeting was that each member of council on committee could review how this workbook is completed and bring their questions and their comments to this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Chair. To speak to what Mr. Trelevan said about public participation, I have the same concerns with timeline. And Councillor Duck actually brought up something that I thought I have the same concerns about, and it's just the way the motion is worded. The fact that we're approving as presented before we've had discussion amongst each other.
No,
that's my perspective.
I'm going to call a point of order and ask for the chair's ruling if they allow the point of order. My point of order is that a motion on the floor can be amended, and through discussion we could amend the motion if committee wishes to change the answers to any of these questions.
Okay, I'll reword it and just say that my preference would have been for us to have had a discussion prior to actually just finding it in my agenda package. That would have been my preference. But I will.
So
if this is the process you want to undertake, we'll go through it. I'm assuming other councillors will have comments to make. I'm just making a comment about how I feel about the process, that I'm not comfortable with it, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Duncan.
Sorry, if I may respond.
Sure, go ahead.
Trying to facilitate this discussion. And so my role as mayor and the CAO's role for setting the agenda did have to make a decision. Would we bring a blank agenda? Would we bring a blank workbook to a committee of the whole meeting, and proceed to work through answering all the, having a discussion and answering all the questions, or with the experience? And I consulted with two staff with regards to completing that, because they participate. We have Ms. Clary and another staff member who participate on a CRD transportation working group on a regular basis. And so these views are, this is a draft and it's presented for discussion. The fact that we have a motion on the floor allows it, as I indicated, to be amended. So I just wanted to explain that it was a decision from myself and from the CAO to try and facilitate a discussion by providing answers and some rationale for those answers, but it does not bind council to that. We can speak to any of these items as if it was a blank workbook.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. The mayor answered my question that I had about the staff involvement, because I was hoping that staff would have had the opportunity to speak to the mayor about what they had felt some of the limitations would be, particularly regarding things, implementations of bylaws and policies, and where they would see difficulty there. And so I'm glad to see that they did have that discussion, because I know that they would actually probably be the touch point with the CRD as they are with our existing regional initiatives. I did the questionnaire because we were provided one that was functional and fillable, and so I did it to see how my answers would compare before actually going through the workbook and seeing what was done. The only differences I had were ones where, the mayor has filled both of the items. I couldn't fill both of them because it was a radio button and you can only pick one. So, and the rankings were all the same. I didn't have any additional comments, and so I'm happy to move forward with the motion as it stands because I had no substantial concerns or edits that showed up by my personally having done this workbook before we came to council. So I don't know what the benefit would have been of us sitting here in council and going through it one by one as a group rather than us each doing that personally on our own time, and instead of having to sit here in a group and then have to discuss each one and the decision for each one as we made it, which would have been a very tedious and probably no more successful process at all than having it come forward now and us be able to compare our answers to what we had before and see if there's any that differed substantially from what the mayor had, than being able to make that amendment right now. If nobody has an amendment, then I think that pretty much demonstrates that the questionnaire as it's going forward is adequate for the discussion as it is. And so having nothing that came out of my own exercise with doing this that differs substantially, I have no problem with moving forward with it as it is.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll make a quick comment. I support the motion as is because I spent the time over the weekend to go through the questionnaire, compare my answers with what the mayor put down, looked at his rationale behind each one, his notes, and as Councillor Duncan suggested, I couldn't see moving too far away from those comments, and I see this as an exercise in expediency. It's something that could easily take a half a day or so for committee to work at as a whole, and we'd be no further ahead. This gives us the opportunity to look at what makes sense for us, and if we see anything that jumps out at us and says, whoa, wait a minute, I don't agree with that, then this is the forum to bring that forward. It's also important to remember that we are one municipality out of 13 that are doing this exercise. It's a very high level questionnaire at this point. There's not very much in the way of specifics. The idea is to get a sense, I suspect, of where the majority municipalities are in creating a framework for an eventual regional transportation board. The end result may be quite different, but I'm quite happy in moving forward with this because, quite frankly, it's the best we've got, and I think a regional transportation board is something we desperately need. I don't see it, as Councillor O'Keefe suggested, that they might be coming and telling us what to do with Resthaven. I don't see that as a likelihood. That's not the role of regional transportation boards. There will be a division of responsibility between local, regional, and provincial, and we're missing the regional component right now. We need this at some point in the future, and I think it's for bigger picture items than what happens with the Lochside Trail and or Resthaven. I think it's really talking to things such as light rail systems and bus routes and anything that's going to make the peninsula a better place to live for the people that are living here, able to get around, in some ways to reduce our dependency on motor vehicles, which everybody talks about, but we don't really do anything to move in that direction. So to me, this is the right step, and I'm quite happy to see where this goes. Thank you. Councillor Garnett and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, I don't know why the misconception's out there. I did do the questionnaire. I filled the workbook out and compared answers, so it's not like I didn't do that. I just wasn't happy with the process. But in terms of the actual document itself, given the demographic of our community, I don't think that the answers lean enough towards local for me, because of the vast majority of trips that are taken here will be local, and our transit system, by all accounts, from what I hear from everybody on the streets, is not adequate. So I fear that if we don't, it's page 4 of the report, number 3, the mayor has no boxes ticked. I've ticked them all because I feel that in the larger context of the CRD, as little old Sydney, we're gonna be overlooked. Because it happens. It happens regular, as evidenced by the Lochside Trail, again. But anyways, that's all I want to say, is that I did in fact do the workbook. And that was one major difference from mine to what was provided by the mayor, is that I ticked all 4 boxes under number 3, identifying opportunities from the local perspective. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Mr. Mayor, you'd like to respond to that? I'll come back to you,
No,
Councillor.
and I appreciate the input, and quite frankly, I anticipated a question from council as to why those 4 boxes weren't checked. And so if I may take that as a question as to why they were not checked, is I think it's easy to check those boxes and express those concerns. I think those all 4 of those concerns, I think, are inherent in creating the regional governance structure, which staff are gonna, CRD staff are gonna have to bring forward to the CRD Transportation Committee and the CRD Board, and it's gonna come back out to municipalities. And so, at this time, we could check those 4 boxes and express those concerns. The reason I didn't check them is I would like to see the process advance in terms of considering what the regional governance authority options are, and not creating blocks at this point in time. There will be sufficient time to express those concerns, and I think they are expressed otherwise in the notes. But I'm happy, through consensus of the council, without it being a formal amendment. If we want to check those 4 boxes and that's the preference of council, that's fine. But I didn't see it as necessary at this time, and I appreciate the question from Councillor Garnett.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I also went through the booklet, and I checked all of the boxes in number 3, and I understand what you're saying, but if it's, the belief is that, these things are inherent in the process, I would think, why are they asking us? My understanding of going through the workbook is that they're reaching out to us to find out what's kind of your general feelings about this. What are some of the things you think we should think about? What are some of your concerns? These are all concerns, and so, whether we can do it by consensus or whether a motion is required, I would like to see all 4 boxes under number 3 checked. In regards to comments that, we don't have to worry about, the regional authority do anything about Rest Haven Drive or something like that. If you look at some of the other transportation governance models, there are models where the regional authority does look after, regional and local roads. So that is something that could happen. And so that's why I think it's important, if we have a concern about local things, I think all of those 3 bullets under number 4 should be added to the worksheet.
Do you want to make a motion to amend?
Oh, sorry.
Well,
Yeah, number 3.
Actually, if I may continue to facilitate the discussion, again, I appreciate the views, and so, I open it up to the other colleagues, how they might feel about that particular question.
Number 3.
Councillor Rintoul.
I will add my voice to be the third if we're looking for consensus to check all 4 boxes on number 3. Thank you.
Is there anyone who is steadfast on not checking those boxes? And then by consensus, if I may, Chair, we could do it by motion. I'm happy to amend the questionnaire to consider it completed, those boxes checked.
Fair enough, then we can.
And so that would be included within the motion that's on the floor.
And so if there's no more questions on the motion or any other boxes that we want to talk about, then we can call the question. All in favor of the motion?
Sorry, just.
To clarify, would we not be amending the motion to read as opposed to as presented to as amended?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Yes.
All right, so we'll change the word approved to as amended. Sorry, after approved to as amended. Now we call questions. There's no more discussion, or was there more discussion? No, I don't have anybody on the speakers list.
Yeah, no, I'm just comparing again my answers. Some of them are a little bit different, but I think, you know, the priorities in the end, on the last page, I have the same priorities as well. A few things different in some of the other things, but the main concern is that number 3 in the local issues, so I think that captures kind of my general feeling, yeah, so I'm fine with that.
So we'll call the question. All in favor of the motion as amended? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And I'll now take
So moved
a
for
motion
adjournment.
to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? I guess we don't have to vote on it.